Hey everyone, this is a piece from the Ideas of Leon Trotsky, edited by Hillel, Ticktin, and Michael Cox. It's titled The Left Opposition in 1923. A footnote says this article first appeared in Critique number 2, 1973. So here we go. In the autumn of 1923, the leadership of the Russian Communist Party was confronted by the activity of a new opposition group. The process of its formation is somewhat unclear, but there is no doubt about the issues which led to its intervention. The peace, the Declaration of the 46, the only joint statement of any significance made by the opposition during 1923, raised two main issues: the economic situation and the party regime. Wikipedia says, the Declaration of 46 was a secret letter sent by a group of 46 leading Soviet communists to the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union on the 15th of October 1923. The declaration followed Leon Trotsky's letter, which was sent to the Politburo on the 8th of October and expressed similar concerns, and thus laying the foundation for the left opposition within the Communist Party of the Soviet Union later that year. The signatories had pointed to issues with the party ban and also called for a review of the factional ban introduced in the 10th Congress through a party conference. The vast majority of the signatories were executed during the Great Purge. Starting back in midsummer 1923, the Soviet economy ran into significant difficulties arising from the scissor crisis, which led to numerous strikes countrywide. Two secret groups within the Communist Party, Workers' Truth and Workers' Group, were uncovered and suppressed by the Soviet secret police. In September to October 1923, the much-anticipated communist revolution in Germany ended in defeat. On the 8th of October 1923, Trotsky sent a letter to the Central Committee and the Central Control Commission, which attributed the difficulties to the lack of intra-party democracy. Trotsky wrote, quote, "In the fiercest moment of war communism, the system of appointment within the party did not have 1/10 of the extent that it has now. Appointment to the secretaries of provincial committees is now the rule. That creates for the secretary a position essentially independent of the local organization. ... The bureaucratization of the party apparatus has developed to unheard of proportions by means of the method of secretarial selection. There has been created a very broad stratum of party workers entering into the apparatus of the government of the party, who completely renounce their own party opinion, at least the open expression of it, as though assuming that the secretarial hierarchy is the apparatus which creates party opinion and party decisions. Beneath this stratum, abstaining from their own opinions, there lies the broad mass of the party, before whom every decision stands in the form of a summons or a command." End quote. One week later, the Declaration of 46 followed. Declaration of the 46 to the Politburo of the CCRP, 15th of October 1923, top secret, to the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party Bolsheviks. And this is just, I guess this is the text of it. Yeah, I guess it's not that long, so I am going to read the Declaration of the 46, which is on the Wikipedia page. "The extreme seriousness of the situation forces us, in the interests of our party, in the interests of the working class, to tell you openly that continuation of the policy of the majority of the Politburo threatens the entire party with grave misfortune. The economic and financial crisis beginning at the end of July this year, with all the political consequences flowing from it, including those within the party, has mercilessly revealed the inadequacy of the party leadership, both in the economic realm and especially in the area of inter-party relations. The haphazard, poorly thought through, and unsystematic decisions of the Central Committee, which hasn't made ends meet in the economy, have led to a situation where, given the presence of undoubtedly major successes in the realm of industry, agriculture, finances, and transport, successes which were achieved by the economy of the nation spontaneously, not thanks to, but in spite of the inadequate leadership, or, to be more precise, the absence of any leadership, we are faced not only with the perspective of the halting of these successes, but with the severe crisis of the economy as a whole. We stand before the approaching breakdown of the Chervenets currency, which spontaneously turned into the basic currency before the liquidation of the budget deficit. We face a credit crisis in which the state bank cannot, without the risk of severe shocks, finance not only industry and trade of industrial goods, but even the purchase of grain for export. We face the cessation of the sale of industrial goods because of high prices, which can be explained on the one hand by the complete absence of planned organizational leadership in industry, and on the other by incorrect credit policy. We face the impossibility of carrying out the grain export program because of the inability to purchase grain. We face extremely low prices for food products, which are ruinous for the peasantry and which threaten massive cutbacks in agricultural production. We face the interruption of wage payments, which evokes the natural dissatisfaction of the workers. We face budget chaos, which directly creates chaos in the government apparatus. Quote, revolutionary means of cutbacks in drawing up the budget and new, unplanned cutbacks during its realization have gone from being temporary measures to a permanent phenomenon, which relentlessly jolts the state apparatus and, as a result of the absence of planning in the cutbacks, causes accidental and spontaneous shocks to it. All these elements of an economic, credit, and financial crisis, which has already begun, if we do not immediately take extensive, well thought out, planned, and energetic measures, if the present lack of leadership continues, we face the possibility of unusually sharp economic shocks, inevitably bound up with domestic political implications, and with the complete paralysis of our foreign activity and capability. Our foreign activity and capability. And the latter, as everyone understands, is now more necessary than ever before. Upon it depends the fate of the world revolution and the working class of all countries. In precisely the same way, we see in the realm of inter-party relations the same incorrect leadership, paralyzing and demoralizing the party, which is particularly clearly felt during the crisis we are passing through. We explain this not by the political incapability of the present party leaders. On the contrary, no matter how much we differ with them in evaluating the situation and in choosing the methods to change it, we think that today's leaders, under any conditions, couldn't help but be appointed by the party to leading post in the workers' dictatorship. Rather, we explain it by the fact that, under the guise of official unity, we actually have a one-sided selection of personnel who can adapt to the views and sympathies of a narrow circle, and a one-sided direction of activity. As a result of the party leadership being distorted by such narrow considerations, the party has to a significant degree ceased to be that living, independent collective which is sensitive to the changes in living reality, precisely because it is connected with thousands of threads to this reality. Instead of this, we observe an ever-progressing, barely disguised division of the party into a secretarial hierarchy, into, quote, laymen, into professional party functionaries, chosen from above, and the other party masses who take no part in social life. This is a fact which is well known to every member of the party. Members of the party who are dissatisfied with this or that directive from the Central Committee or even a provincial committee, or who are plagued by doubts, or who have noted, quote, to themselves, various mistakes, things out of line or disorder of some sort. are afraid to speak out speak about it at party gatherings. Even worse, they are afraid to talk to anyone. They are afraid to talk to one another unless they consider their interlocutor to be absolutely reliable, in the sense of not being, quote, talkative. Free discussion within the party has virtually disappeared. Party public opinion has been stifled. Now it is not the party's broad masses who nominate and choose provincial conferences and party congresses, which in turn nominate and choose provincial committees and the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party. On the contrary, is the secretarial hierarchy, the party hierarchy which to an ever greater degree chooses the delegates to the conferences and congresses, which to an ever greater degree are becoming the executive conferences of this hierarchy. The regime which has been established within the party is absolutely intolerable. It is killing the independence of the party, replacing the party with a selected bureaucratic apparatus which functions smoothly during normal times, but which inevitably misfires during moments of crisis, and which threatens to become absolutely helpless when confronted with the serious events which lie ahead. The situation which is developed is explained by the fact that the regime of fractional dictatorship within the party which unfolded after the 10th Congress has outlived itself. Many of us consciously choose not to resist such a regime. Chose not to resist such a regime. The about face of 1921, followed by Lenin's illness, demanded, as far as some of us were concerned, a dictatorship within the party as a temporary measure. Other comrades from the very beginning reacted to it skeptically or opposed it. In any case, by the 12th Party Congress, this regime had become obsolete. It began to show the other side of the coin. The inter-party bonds began to weaken. The party began to wither. Extreme oppositional, even openly unhealthy, tendencies within the party began to take on an anti-party character, for there was no inter-party, comradely discussion of the most acute questions, and such a discussion could have revealed, without any difficulty, the unhealthy character of these tendencies, both to the party masses and to the majority of their participants. As a result, we have seen the formation of illegal groupings, which draw party members away from the party, and we have witnessed the party losing contact with the working masses. If the situation which is developed is not radically changed in the very near future, the economic crisis in Soviet Russia and the crisis of the fractional dictatorship within the party will strike heavy blows to the workers' dictatorship in Russia and to the Russian Communist Party. With such a burden on its shoulders, the dictatorship of the proletariat in Russia and its leader, the Russian Communist Party, cannot enter the field of the impending new international shocks in any other way than with the perspective of failure along the entire front of proletarian struggle. Of course, it would at first glance be easiest of all to resolve the question in the following sense. In view of the situation, there is not and there cannot be any place now for raising the question of changing the party's course, of placing on the agenda new and complex tasks, etc., etc. But it is absolutely clear that such a point of view would be a position of officially closing one's eyes to the actual situation, since the entire danger lies in the fact that there is no genuine ideological or practical unity in the face of exceedingly complex domestic and foreign situations. In the party, the more silently and secretly the struggle is waged, the more ferocious it becomes. If we raise this question before the Central Committee, then it is precisely in order to find the swiftest and most painless resolution of the contradictions which are tearing the party apart, and to rapidly place the party on healthy foundations. We need real unity in discussions and in actions. The impending ordeals require the unanimous, fraternal, absolutely conscious, extremely energetic, and extremely unified activity of all the members of our party. The fractional regime must be eliminated, and this must be done first of all by those who have created it. It must be replaced by a regime of comradely unity and inter-party democracy. In order to realize all that has been outlined above, and to take the necessary measures to extricate ourselves from the economic, political, and party crisis, we propose that the Central Committee, as a first and most urgent step, call a conference of members of the Central Committee with the most prominent and active party cadres, in order that the list of those invited include a number of comrades who have views concerning the situation which differ from the views of the majority of the Central Committee. Signed, Evgeny Preobrazhensky, B. Breslov, L. Serebryakov. While not agreeing with certain points in this letter explaining the cause of the situation which is developed, and feeling that the party has come up against problems which cannot fully be resolved by the methods employed up to now, I fully endorse the final conclusion of the present letter. Signed, A. Beloborodov, 11th of October, 1923. I am in complete agreement with the proposal, although I differ with several points concerning motives. Signed, A. Rosengoltz and M. Alsky. In general, I share the thoughts of this appeal. The need for a direct and open approach to all our sore points is so overdue that I fully support the proposal to call the indicated conference in order to choose the practical ways capable of leading us out of the accumulated difficulties. Signed, Antonov Ovsenko, A. Vendetkov, I.N. Smirnov, G. Piatakov, V. Osinski, N. Muralov, T. Sopronov, A. Goldsman. The situation in the party and the international situation are such that they demand the extraordinary concentration and unity of party forces more than ever before. While ascribing to the declaration, I view it exclusively as an attempt to create unity in the party and to prepare the party for upcoming events. Naturally, at the present moment, there can be no talk of inter-party struggle in any form whatsoever. It is necessary for the Central Committee to soberly assess the situation and to adopt urgent measures to eliminate dissatisfaction within the party as well as within the non-party masses. Signed, A. Goldsman, V. Maximovsky, L. Sosnovsky, Danishevsky, P. Mesyatsev, G. Korechko. I do not agree with a number of assessments in the first part of the declaration. I do not agree with a number of characterizations of the inter-party situation. At the same time, I am deeply convinced that the state of the party demands the adopting of radical measures, for things are not well in the party at the present time. I fully share the practical proposal. Signed, A. Bubnov, A. Voronsky, V. Smirnov, E. Bosch, I. Bike, V. Kosior, F. Lokotskov. I am in complete agreement with the evaluation of the economic situation. I consider the weakening of the political dictatorship at the present moment to be dangerous, but things must be aired out. I find a conference to be absolutely necessary. Signed, Kaganovich, Drobnis, P. Kovalenko, A. E. Mintkin, and V. Yakovleva. I am in complete agreement with the practical proposals. B. Eltson. I sign with the same reservations as Comrade Bubnov. M. Levitin. I sign with the same reservations as Bubnov, sharing neither the form nor the tone, which all the more convinces me to agree with the practical part of the given declaration. I. Polyudov, O. Schmidl, V. Vaganian, I. Stukov, A. Lubanov, R. Farbman, S. Vasilchenko, Mikhail Zhakov, A. Puzakov, M. Nikolaev. Since during recent times I have been somewhat removed from the work of the party centers, I abstained from the judgments of the two leading paragraphs of the introductory part. I agree with the rest. Signed, Averin. I am in agreement with the part outlining the economic and political situation of the country. I feel that in the part which depicts the inter-party situation, a certain exaggeration has been allowed, It is absolutely necessary to immediately take measures to preserve the unity of the party. Signed, M. Boguslavsky. I'm not fully in agreement with the first part, which speaks about the economic situation of the country. The latter is indeed very serious and demands great attention, but up until now the party has not advanced people who would have been able to lead better than those who have been leading until now. Regarding the question of the inter-party situation, I feel that there is a significant portion of truth in everything which has been said, and I consider it necessary to take emergency measures. Signed, F. Dudnik. Okay, so thank you for letting me read such an extensive Wikipedia page on the Declaration of the 46. Back to the text. The Declaration of the 46, the only joint statement of any significance made by the opposition during 1923, raised two main issues: the economic situation and the party regime. As subjects of opposition, these two issues were not new. What was especially significant about the Declaration of the 46 was that the Declaration of the 46 connected the economic situation and the party regime. The statement declared that, quote, the economic and financial crisis, ... has inexorably revealed the inadequacy of the leadership of the party, ... especially in the domain of internal party relations, end quote. The Declaration of the 46 discussed the shortcomings of economic policy and made the assertion that the party was being replaced by, quote, a recruited bureaucratic apparatus, ... which inevitably fails in moments of crisis, end quote. Footnote. The Declaration of 46 was dated 15th of October 1923. It brought together supporters of Trotsky, for example, Yevgeny Preobrazhensky, Leonid Serebryakov, Yuri Pyatakov, Vladimir Antonov Ovseyenko, and Ivan Smirnov, and members of the former Democratic Centralist opposition, for example, V. Osinsky, Timothy Sopranov, Andrei Bubnov, V. Kosior, V. Maximovsky, and Vladimir Smirnov. Although by no means homogeneous, the opposition of 1923 can justifiably be regarded as the foundation of the left opposition. E. H. Carr, in his book The Interregnum 1923 to 1924, gives the full text of the Declaration together with the various signatures and the reservations expressed. Quotations from the Declaration are not footnoted separately. One second. Yeah, I'm not finding any descriptions of Carr's book here, but anyway, back to the text and footnote. The economic crisis, the complex, quote, scissors crisis, the causes and nature of which are of secondary relevance to this article, and are therefore ignored, helped to promote the opposition in a number of ways. Firstly, the opposition regarded the inability of the official party leadership to deal effectively with economic problems to be a consequence of a bureaucratic party structure. Footnote. The term official leadership is used here as a convenience to denote those party leaders who were against the opposition, principally Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Stalin. The term, quote, leadership by itself is insufficient since many prominent oppositionists could be considered to be party leaders. The use of the term is a convention and is not meant to imply that there was an unofficial leadership. End footnote. Secondly, those who made up the opposition found themselves in general advocating solutions, for example, efficient planning for industrial development, which clashed with the opinions of the official leadership. Thirdly, the harmful effects of the economic crisis on the working class, the fall in the standard of living, and rising unemployment resulted in strikes which are supported by groups. The workers' group, Workers' Truth, involving party members. This gave rise to a general feeling of disquiet about the internal party situation, which went beyond the ranks of the nascent opposition. The Wikipedia for the Scissors Crisis says, the Scissors Crisis was an incident in early 1923 Soviet history during the new economic policy when there was a widespread widening gap, price scissors, between industrial and agricultural prices. The term is now used to describe this economic circumstance in many periods of history. Like the blades of a pair of open scissors, the prices of industrial goods and agricultural goods diverged, reaching a peak in October 1923, where industrial prices were 276% of their 1913 industrial levels, while agricultural prices were only 89% of their 1913 levels. The name was coined by Leon Trotsky after the scissor-shaped price-time graph. This meant that peasants' incomes fell and it became difficult for them to buy manufactured goods. As a result, peasants began to stop selling their produce and revert to subsistence farming, leading to fears of a famine. After the 1927 crisis, Soviet economist Lev Rakovsky performed an analysis and actively participated in the planning of the state intervention that followed. A similar crisis had occurred in 1916 when, for example, the price of rye rose by 47%, whereas that of a pair of boots by 334%. The crisis happened because agricultural production had rebounded quickly from the famine of 1921 to 22 and the Russian Civil War. In contrast, industry took longer to recover due to the need to rebuild infrastructure. Furthermore, the problem was exacerbated by the government seeking to avoid another famine by keeping the bread grain prices at artificially low levels. By August 1923, a wave of strikes spread across Russian industrial centers, sparked off by the crisis. Within the Communist Party, the Declaration of 46 was produced as a signed protest sent to the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party. The Declaration of 46 was produced Within the Communist Party, the Declaration of 46 was produced as a signed protest sent to the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party. To combat the crisis, the government reduced costs of industrial production by cutting staff, rationalizing production, controlling wages and benefits, and reducing the influence of traders and middlemen, netmen, by expanding the network of consumer cooperatives, such as the People's Commissariat of Trade. As a result of these actions, the imbalance started to decrease, and by April 1924, the agricultural price index had reached 92, compared to its 1913 level, and the industrial index had fallen to 131. And Wikipedia for the Workers' Group says, the Workers' Group of the Russian Communist Party was formed in 1923 to oppose the excessive power of bureaucrats and managers in the new Soviet society and in the Russian Communist Party, Bolsheviks. The Workers' Group's leading member was Gavril Myasnikov. The Workers' Group defended that the Soviet state and public enterprises should be run by Soviets elected from the workplace, and that the new economic policy was in danger of becoming a, quote, new exploitation of the proletariat, if not controlled by the workers' democracy. Its main activists were arrested in September 1923, and the group's activity was largely suppressed thereafter, although the workers' group continued to exist until the 1930s, inside prisons and possibly also underground. In 1920, Gavril Myasnikov, then head of the Communist Party in Perm, in the Ural, began to express discontent with aspects of the evolution of the Soviet state, such as the progressive departure of the party leadership from the base militants, the growing number of non-workers in the party in the leading positions, and the replacement of workers' control by, quote, one-man management in nationalized industries. At the party's ninth Congress, Myasnikov began to openly publicize his criticisms, advocating a return to the program presented by Vladimir Lenin in The State and Revolution, a radically democratic state without centralized bureaucracy. In the autumn of 1920, Myasnikov was transferred to Petrograd, but Myasnikov soon came into conflict with Grigory Zinoviev and was again sent to the Urals. In 1921, Myasnikov published a manifesto critical of the party line, advocating an end to the death penalty, the management of industry by workers' councils, and unrestricted freedom of the press, quote, from monarchists to anarchists, end quote. The Provincial Party Committee forbade Myasnikov to defend his ideas in public meetings, but Myasnikov disobeyed, and after an exchange of letters with Lenin, was expelled from the party in 1922. In 1923, Myasnikov, after having his request for readmission to the party rejected, organized the workers' group, together with N.V. Kuznetsov, also expelled in 1923, and B.P. Moiseev. In February, the group released its, quote, manifesto, intending to influence the 11th Party Congress of the Communist Party, which is to be held in April. The text began to be smuggled around the Soviet Union, and by summer 1923, the workers' group had hundreds of adherents, about 300 in Moscow alone, mostly workers and many from the workers' opposition. Before the 12th Congress, an anonymous document, most likely authored by Myasnikov, circulated calling for the party to adopt the ideas of the workers' group manifesto, and for Grigory Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev, and Joseph Stalin to be excluded from the Central Committee. However, at the Congress, the group's ideas were violently attacked by leading Bolshevik figures such as Leon Trotsky, Karl Radek, and Grigory Zinoviev himself. At that time, Lenin was already incapacitated for health reasons. With Myasnikov being arrested shortly thereafter and, in effect, exiled to Germany, where Myasnikov contacted the Communist Workers' Party of Germany, who helped Myasnikov disseminate the Workers' Group Manifesto. In the meantime, in the Soviet Union, the group was being organized under the leadership of Moiseev, from now on replaced by Makh, M-A-K-H, and Kuznetsov, and on the 5th of June 1923 organized a conference in Moscow and elected a bureau. The working group followed a double line of action, since on the one hand its main leaders had been expelled from the Communist Party, and the group was beginning to function as a clandestine alternative party, but on the other hand continued to regard itself as a faction of the Communist Party, trying to act as much as possible within it. The workers' group militants could be A. Communist Party militants, B. Former militants expelled from the Communist Party for political reasons, C. If they were not affiliated with any party, they were advised to join the Communist Party. In August and September 1923, I believe we're still in 1923, right? Yeah. There was a wave of strikes in Moscow and other cities, apparently spontaneous without links with opposition groups. The workers' group planned to seize the occasion and call a general strike and a workers' demonstration, which would be led by a portrait of Lenin. But in September, it was the target of widespread repression by the party leadership and the secret police, OGPU, with its leaders having been imprisoned, their literature confiscated, and their workplaces closed. After the arrest, 12 members of the workers' group were expelled from the Communist Party and several others were reprimanded. Myasnikov returned to the Soviet Union at the end of 1923, having been promised he would be set free, and was immediately arrested, being internally exiled in 1927 to Yerevan, Armenia. Myasnikov would flee the country in 1928, but returned in 1944 only to be arrested in January 1945 and executed in November of the same year. According to the historian Paul Avrich, in 1924 the workers' group had been effectively dismembered. However, according to Ian Hebbs, the group would have continued to clandestinely produce manifestos and pamphlets until 1929 and continued to exist until the early 1930s. Among Hebb's sources is the French publication L'Ouvrier Communiste, which claimed in 1930, according to information from Myasnikov then in Turkey, that in 1929 In the USSR, activists were accused of being linked to the workers' group, namely of distributing their newspaper, The Workers' Way to Power, continued to be arrested and expelled from the Communist Party. Also, according to the Soviet police interrogation of Myasnikov in 1945, the workers' group was still functioning in 1928, and Myasnikov would have frequent meetings in Yerevan with envoys from the group's Central Bureau. It would have even been the Bureau to decide Myasnikov's flight from the USSR following the illegal publication of his pamphlet, What is the Workers' State? The workers' group considered that a new oligarchy was being formed made up of senior party leaders, company directors, etc., and defended the election of workers' councils in all nationalized factories and their participation in management, the election of company directors, union leaders, and central authorities by the congresses of workers' councils, freedom of expression for all manual workers, the role of trade unions in private companies in their function of controlling their managers, namely ensuring compliance with labor laws and paying taxes, autonomy and internal democracy in the communist parties of the various nationalities of the Soviet Union, the abolition of the Council of People's Commissars and the assignment of its functions to the All-Russian Center Executive Committee. At the international level, refusal of the Communist International strategy of alliances with the parties of the Second International and the 2.5 International. Although authors like Paul Avrich or John Merritt affirm that the workers' group considered the new economic policy as the, quote, new exploitation of the proletariat, which in its manifesto defended that the NEP was inevitable given the economic backwardness of Russia, which particularly in agriculture would be heavily dependent on small producers. The expression new exploitation of the proletariat is referred to as something the NEP was at risk of becoming if not controlled by, quote, proletarian democracy, end quote, as it favored the emergence of a privileged group. References that the group presented the NEP as a, quote, new exploitation seem to have had their origin in the book Myasnikov's China by Vladimir Gordovich Surin, published in 1924 and represented the official position of the Communist Party on the faction. Myasnikov was a left communist in 1918, later had contacts with the workers' opposition without having formally integrated into the workers' opposition, and was one of the subscribers along with former members of the workers' opposition such as Alexander Shliapnikov and Alexander Kollontai of the Charter of the 22, drafted in 1922 advocating more internal democracy and freedom of opinion within the party. In addition, a large part of the militancy of the workers' group came from the workers' opposition, and Kollontai was even invited to participate in a demonstration organized by the group. The workers' group manifesto has a critical attitude towards two other opposition groups at the same time, the Democratic Centralists and Workers' Truth, accusing the Democratic Centralists of being only concerned with democracy within the party and not for the proletariat, and the latter of actually accepting and promoting the restoration of capitalism. Later, the workers' group approached some of the other factions. In August 1928, the workers' group held a conference in Moscow where it approved an appeal to the Group of 15, a faction derived from the Group of Democratic Centralists, and to the remnants of the workers' opposition to adopt a common program where a proposal of statutes for a, quote, workers' communist party was discussed, bringing together the workers' group and the Group of 15. In the 1930s, in the Vorkuta labor camp, where the hell am I? It was constituted a, quote, federation of left communists, bringing together prisoners from the workers' group, Democratic Centralists, and some Trotskyists. Already in exile, Myasnikov established links with Trotsky, who had attacked Myasnikov in the early 1920s, but who in the meantime came to defend very similar positions regarding internal party democracy and the strategy of the Communist International, albeit in disagreement with regard to the nature of the Soviet Union, which for Trotsky continued to be a, quote, worker state, while Myasnikov considered to be, quote, state capitalist. The workers' group was linked to the Communist Workers' Party of Germany, KAPD, and the Communist Workers' International, but it would later break from the Communist Workers' International for refusing any united front with the parties of the Communist International, in counterpoint to the workers' group's line of continuing to work within the Soviet Communist Party. Around 1930, Menazhnikov in exile, and the workers' group, so far as it still existed as an organization, were associated with the communist workers' groups in France, with their newspaper, the Ouvrier Communiste, a dissident group of Bourguigism, however, ideologically aligned with the German and Dutch tradition of the communist left. Okay, so that's workers' group. And Workers' Truth was a Russian socialist opposition group founded in 1921. Workers' Truth published a newspaper with the same name, Workers' Truth, which first appeared in September 1921. The Workers' Truth considered that the Soviet economy had been transformed into a form of capitalism, with the technical managers and organizers as a new ruling class, together with the private entrepreneurs that emerged with the new economic policy, the Communist Party having become the representative of that ruling class, and no longer of the proletariat. Thus the Workers' Truth, although continuing to act within the Communist Party, defended the need to create a new Workers' Party. Workers' Truth's main activists were arrested in September 1923, the group's activity being largely suppressed thereafter, and expelled from the Communist Party in December of the same year. Their programmatic statement, titled The Appeal/Message to the Revolutionary Proletariat and to all revolutionary elements who remained faithful to the struggling working class, was released in January 1923 by a Menshevik newspaper edited in Berlin. Workers' Truth argued that during World War I, quote, military state capitalism had accelerated the tendency towards centralization of economic management and given rise to a new bourgeois class, composed of the most effective elements of the old bourgeoisie, together with new elements drawn from the technical, organized intelligentsia. Workers' Truth claimed that although the Russian Communist Party had been the party of the working class, the Russian Communist Party had become, quote, the party of organizers and directors of the governmental apparatus and economic life along capitalist lines, end quote. And that these, like the private entrepreneurs that emerged with the new economic policy, led a life of privilege. To combat this situation, they proposed the formation of secret propaganda circles in the workplace, in trade unions and other workers' organizations, as well as within the Communist Party and its affiliates. The group considered it necessary to create a workers' party, albeit at least provisionally accepting the existing government and the Communist Party, from both non-party workers and Communist Party affiliates, advocating proposals such as freedom of expression and association for, quote, revolutionary elements of the proletariat, end quote, the fight against administrative arbitrariness, the end of the, quote, fetish of reserving the right to vote for workers, defense of the economic interest of the proletariat in compliance with labor laws, good relations between the USSR and what they considered, quote, advanced capitalist countries, Germany and the USA, and boycotting, quote, reactionary France, support for the national bourgeoisie of countries like China, India, or Egypt against colonialism. The intellectual roots of Workers' Truth are most likely in the prolet cult movement, and above all in the manifesto of the, quote, collectivist, published in 1921 by some elements of this movement, and possibly also linked to the workers' opposition. Warning of the danger of bureaucratic intelligentsia becoming a ruling class in a capitalist state. Workers' Truth activists were mostly students, and from the, quote, red academies, that is the higher education institutions created for the purpose to form the intellectuality of the new regime. Nevertheless, Workers' Truth argued that promoting cultural work among industrial workers was more important than funding universities, as these would be frequented by ex-workers who would join the technocrats. Workers' Truth considered that the Mensheviks, while making a good analysis of the ideological and sociological evolution of the Communist Party, defended reactionary positions in the economy by defending the return of the expropriated companies to their former owners, while the socialist revolutionaries had lost their social base, the peasantry. The workers' opposition, on the other hand, had revolutionary elements among its supporters, which Workers' Truth tried to captivate, but in, quote, objectively reactionary, end quote, program, which meant returning to the methods of, quote, war communism. For its part, the workers' group led by Gavril Myasnikov in its manifesto accused the Workers' Truth of, in practice, by saying that Russia was already capitalist, accepting and promoting the restoration of capitalism, and limiting the working class to fight only for better salaries. In August 1923, a wave of strikes spread across Russian industrial centers, sparked off by the economic crisis that had arisen earlier that year, associated with the rise in the prices of industrial goods compared to those of agricultural products, the so-called, quote, scissors. Fearing that dissident communist groups like Workers' Truth or the Workers' Group could capitalize on the labor unrest to gain support among the working class, the Communist Party leadership decided to take action against them. On the 8th of September 1923, the Soviet secret police arrested several people accused of having links with Workers' Truth, such as Fanya Shutskever, Paulina Las-Kozlova, Efim Shulman, Vladimir Kelkevich, and also the philosopher and, quote, old Bolshevik Alexander Bogdanov. Bogdanov denied any organizational involvement with Workers' Truth, though they had claimed that they were inspired by Bogdanov's views, and demanded for a face-to-face meeting with Felix Dzerzhinsky, with whom he spoke twice before being released on the 13th of October. In December 1923, Fanya Samoilova, Shutskever, Efim Rafaelovich Shulman, Vladimir Markovich Gaikachev, Yakov Grigorovich Budnitsky, Pauline Ivanovna Las-Kozlova, Oleg Petrovich Vikman Belev, and Nelly Georgievna Krim were identified as the leaders of Workers' Truth and expelled from the Communist Party. At least Fanya Shutskever and Pauline Las-Kozlova would be reinstated in the party in 1926 and 1927, respectively. Shutskever would be arrested again in 1938. With the arrests of September 1923, the workers' group was effectively dissolved. Okay, so back to the actual text. Thank you for indulging me. The Declaration of the 46 shows that the primary concern of the opposition was not with bureaucratism as an evil in itself. A more fundamental concern was the implications of bureaucratism, the effects on the vitality of the party, and its ability to influence events decisively. As the Declaration of the 46 illustrates, the opposition was worried that the party would not deal adequately with the international situation, which was particularly critical in the autumn of 1923. The position was further aggravated by the enforced retirement of Lenin as a result of illness. His presence might well have reduced the tensions that led to the opposition's struggle. Perhaps, as in the past, Lenin would have led the party onto a changed course as events demanded, and thus avoided a permanent fracture. In any case, Lenin's absence allowed the friction between Trotsky and the official leadership to find political expression. New section, the course of struggle. The first stage of the struggle of the left opposition from October 1923 to January 1924 can be divided into three periods. Firstly, an attempt by the opposition to raise issues in secret at the highest levels of the party as a prelude to broader discussion. This was met by condemnation. Secondly, a period of concessions by the official leadership, during which they allowed relatively open discussion of the issues and agreed to a resolution on party democracy, which made considerable concessions to the opposition. Thirdly, repression of the opposition culminating in a condemnation by the 13th Party Conference in January 1924. Footnote. Since this article cannot deal with the details of the struggle, readers are referred to Isaac Deutscher's The Prophet Unarmed, Chapter 2, E.H. Carr's The Interregnum, and R.V. Daniels' The Conscience of the Revolution, Chapter 9. Source references relating to the views of the opposition and the official leadership are kept to a minimum. End footnote. The first period opened with a letter from Trotsky dated 8th of October to the Central Committee. This letter, prompted in part by an attempt to restrict Trotsky's power on the Military Revolutionary Committee, raised issues of economic policy and roundly criticized the, quote, bureaucratization of the party apparatus, which had developed to, quote, unheard of proportions by means of the method of secretarial selection, end quote. It concluded by threatening, quote, to make known the true state of affairs to every member of the party, those whom Trotsky considered to be sufficiently prepared, matured, and self-restrained, ... end quote. Footnote. Trotsky's letter, the reply by the Politburo, and Trotsky's response have never been published in full. Lengthy extracts were published in Socialist Herald, a Menshevik organ published in Berlin, number 11th, 81, 28th of May, 1924. Partial translations are to be found in Max Eastman's book, Since Lenin Died. I don't see any descriptions for that book. End footnote. This letter was quickly followed by the Declaration of the 46, which it may well have prompted. At the very least, several signatories of the Declaration must have been aware of Trotsky's move, just as Trotsky would surely have been aware of the intention to make such a declaration. Footnote. Several of Trotsky's closest political associates were among the 46. Trotsky was later accused of playing a leading part in organizing the 46, but it is unlikely that Trotsky did so. Throughout the struggle of the 1923 opposition, Trotsky refused to associate himself directly with the opposition, although this article considers Trotsky as part of the opposition. Also, the Declaration went further than Trotsky by questioning the ruling on factions. E.H. Carr considers that Trotsky was invited to associate himself with the group. See Carr's The Interregnum. End footnote. I wanted to look at the Wikipedia for the Military Revolutionary Committee. The Military Revolutionary Committee was the name for military organs created by the Bolsheviks under the Soviets in preparation for the October Revolution. October 1917 to March 1918. The committees were powerful directing bodies of revolt, installing and securing Soviet power. They executed a role of provisional extraordinary organs, the Bolshevik power. That's a weird sentence. The most notable ones were those of the Petrograd Soviet, the Moscow Soviet, and at Stavka. The Petrograd Military Revolutionary Committee was created on the 29th of October, 1917. The idea for organization of the armed revolt battle center belongs to Vladimir Lenin. In his letter, Marxism and Revolt, directed to the Central Committee of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Bolsheviks in September 1917, Lenin put on the agenda the task of preparing an armed uprising, writing, quote, and to treat the revolt in a Marxist way, that is, as an art, we at the same time, without losing a moment, must organize headquarters of the insurgent groups, ... The decision of Central Committee of the RSDLP of October 23rd, the Committee of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Bolsheviks of October 23rd and 29th, 1917, on enhanced preparations for the armed revolt hastened the creation of uprising bodies at central and local levels. The Military Revolutionary committees were elected from representatives of the Bolsheviks Party, Soviets, factory or soldier committees, Bolshevik military organizations, Voyenka, Red Guards, and others. The committees were at various levels such as gubernial, city, county, district, Volos, while in the army were front lines, Army Corps, division, and regimental. On occasions, the functions of the Military Revolutionary Committee were performed by revolutionary committees. The Military Revolutionary Committees were not uniform in terms of their social and party composition. However, most of them were predominantly represented by Bolsheviks. The first headquarters of armed uprising became the Petrograd Military Revolutionary Committee that was created by the Petrograd Soviet on the 25th of October 1917. Prior to a victorious moment of the uprising in Petrograd, there were over 40 military revolutionary committees in the country, the main activity of which was military and technical preparations for the forthcoming revolt. During the, quote, triumphant advance of Soviet power, end quote, there was a mass establishment of military revolutionary committees. Many military revolutionary committees appeared on initiative of the arrived delegates of the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets. Big squad of commissars, emissaries, agitators was sent, this is a terrible Wikipedia article, to various countries' regions by the Petrograd Military Revolutionary Committee on direction of the Central Committee of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Bolsheviks. The Bolsheviks party composed the committees of experienced organizers. Okay, so back to the text. The response of the official leadership was to hold a plenum of the Central Committee, together with the Central Control Commission and delegates of 10 leading party organizations. This meeting, in the absence of Trotsky through illness, but in the presence of 12 invited signatories from the 46, considered a resolution put by Preobrazhensky included as an appendix to this article, but which rejected it in favor of the resolution on the internal party situation. The resolution, accepted by 102 votes to 2, with 10 abstentions, gave no record of the points raised by the opposition, but, quote, resolutely condemned, end quote, the action of the 46, quote, as a step of factional splitting politics, end quote. It characterized Trotsky's action as, quote, a grave political error, end quote, and one which quote, has objectively assumed the character of a factional move, end quote. The resolution is translated in Against Trotskyism, published in Moscow, 1972. I want to read the Wikipedia for Preobrazhensky. Yevgeny Preobrazhensky lived from 1886 to 1937. Preobrazhensky was a Russian revolutionary, Soviet politician, and Marxist economist. Preobrazhensky's main contribution to Marxist theory is the concept of, quote, primitive socialist accumulation, which holds that industrialization in an underdeveloped and agrarian economy such as Russia in 1917 must rely on the squeezing of agriculture, for example by the socialist state buying agricultural goods at low prices and selling back industrial goods at high prices. Preobrazhensky joined the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party in 1903, and after the establishment of Soviet Russia became a party secretary and member of the Central Committee in 1920. During the 1920s, Preobrazhensky opposed Joseph Stalin's bureaucratization and centralization of the party and advocacy of socialism in one country, becoming linked to Leon Trotsky and a leader of the left opposition movement. In 1927, Preobrazhensky was removed from the party on Stalin's orders, but was readmitted in 1930 after Stalin had moved towards his favored policies. During Stalin's Great Purge, Preobrazhensky was arrested in 1935 and shot in 1937. Yevgeny Alexeyevich Preobrazhensky was born in Bolkov, Ural Governorate, Russian Empire, on the 27th of February, 1886. Preobrazhensky's father was the son of an Orthodox priest who taught for 7 years in a zemstvo school before his ordination in 1883. Following his appointment as a parish priest in Bolkov in the summer of 1883, the elder Preobrazhensky opened an elementary school for the parish at his own expense. It was in that school that Yevgeny was first educated. In an autobiography written for the Great Russian Encyclopedia, Preobrazhensky recalled being a very religious child and intellectually precocious child, who learned to read at the age of 4. After leaving his father's private school, Preobrazhensky spent 2 years attending the state-operated Bolkov public school. Preobrazhensky subsequently left the town to attend the classically oriented gymnasium in the provincial capital of Oryol, where Preobrazhensky remembered himself as the, quote, second-best student in the class. It was during Preobrazhensky's years at the Ural Gymnasium that Preobrazhensky first became interested in politics, turning from the subjects taught in the classical gymnasium to reading newspapers, intellectual journals, history textbooks, and socially oriented novels. At the age of 14, Preobrazhensky decided that he was an atheist and rejected, quote, the religious quackery, end quote, that he witnessed firsthand. This brought Preobrazhensky into conflict with his priestly father, who in 1902 was appointed dean of the network of church-run schools in Bolkov parish. The estrangement between father and son would last for decades. During his 5th or 8th years at the gymnasium, Preobrazhensky began to accumulate illegal radical literature, including a proclamation by revolutionary students of the Ekaterinoslav Mining Institute, an account of a beating of protesting students at the hands of Cossacks, the hectographed editions of radical poetry and song lyrics. That summer, upon Preobrazhensky's return to the family home at Bolkov, Preobrazhensky closely reviewed this and other illegal material and determined to become actively involved in the revolutionary movement seeking the overthrow of the Tsarist regime in Russia. Preobrazhensky decided henceforth, quote, to devote a minimum of time to the gymnasium subjects, end quote, merely enough to attain passing marks, to dedicate the bulk of his hours to the study of history and economics. Among the budding revolutionaries who were his friends, and was one Alexander Alexin, the son of a local printer whom Preobrazhensky persuaded to steal lead type from his father's printing works to establish an illegal print shop of his own that could produce better results than a hectograph could provide. Preobrazhensky attempted to set type for a pamphlet reproducing revolutionary song lyrics and a declaration, "We renounce the old world." But his inferior printing equipment fell apart before he could master the process, and the type was eventually returned to Alexin's printworks without any printed publications being produced. During his 7th year at the gymnasium, Preobrazhensky felt compelled to choose which revolutionary organization to support, being torn between the competing strategies of the peasant-oriented Socialist Revolutionary Party and the Marxist Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. Influenced by the Communist Manifesto and the development of scientific socialism by work by Friedrich Engels, Preobrazhensky cast his lot with the latter, believing its approach to be scientifically based. Together with two friends, Evgraf Litkins and Ivan Anisimov, who later joined the Mensheviks, Preobrazhensky declared his formal allegiance to the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party in 1903. After the start of the Russo-Japanese War, the Urel Committee of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party issued an anti-war proclamation, which the three students were ordered to distribute. They did this by sneaking into the changing room and stuffing over 150 copies in the coat pockets of older students. The police investigated but could not identify the culprits, and all three were accepted as members of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party. During the summer before his 8th and final year at the Urel Gymnasium, Preobrazhensky worked as a Russian Social Democratic Labor Party propagandist to the workers of Dyatkov factory in Byransky Rayon. Preobrazhensky was able to recruit the son of the Bryansky police to the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party and successfully managed to conceal his small rotary mimeograph machine from searching authorities in a locked drawer of the inspector's own desk. Periodic meetings were held in the neighboring forest. In October 1905, Preobrazhensky was co-opted into the Urel Party Committee. The Russian Social Democratic Labor Party had by then split between the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, and the Mensheviks. The 19-year-old Preobrazhensky was one of only two convinced Bolsheviks on the committee. In November 1905, Preobrazhensky traveled to Moscow, where he was promoted to the position of chief propagandist for urban Preobrazhensky Rayon. For the next 12 years, he was an itinerant professional revolutionary. He was arrested for the first time in Perm in March 1906, but released after 5 months. He then moved to the Ural region, which he represented at the 4th Russian Social Democratic Labor Party Conference in Helsingfors, Helsinki, in November 1907. From 1909, he was a member of the Bolshevik Party Bureau in Irkutsk. He was arrested several times. On trial with other Bolsheviks in Yekaterinburg, he was defended by Alexander Kerensky, who in 1917 was head of the provisional government until it was overthrown by the Bolsheviks. After the February Revolution in 1917, Preobrazhensky returned to the Urals, where he was elected to the Regional Party Committee, which he represented at the 6th Congress of the Bolshevik Party, beginning near the end of July 1917, where Preobrazhensky was elected as a candidate member, alternate to the party's governing Central Committee. From January 1918, Preobrazhensky was a candidate member of the Ural Provincial Committee of the Bolshevik Party. He was president of the Presidium of the Ural Regional Committee of the Communist Party from May 1918 and was in that post when Nicholas II and his family were killed in the city of Yekaterinburg. Although it was the Ural Regional Soviet under Alexander Beloborodov, Boris Dedkovsky, and Philip Goloshchiokin, who directly ordered the execution of the imperial family. Nonetheless, Preobrazhensky was aware of the decision in advance and discussed the matter with Lenin in Moscow. In 1918, Preobrazhensky joined the left communist faction, which opposed the draconian peace with Germany established by the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk. It was at this time that Preobrazhensky became closely affiliated with Nikolai Bukharin, himself a popular left communist leader and member of the party Central Committee. In 1919, Preobrazhensky co-wrote the book The ABC of Communism with Nikolai Bukharin, who would strongly disagree with Preobrazhensky on the industrialization issue. Preobrazhensky also wrote The New Economics, a polemical essay on the dynamics of an economy and transition to socialism. Also, the books, or a pamphlet, Anarchism and Communism and the Decline of Capitalism. Preobrazhensky was elected as a full member of the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party at its 9th Congress, which opened at the end of March 1920. Preobrazhensky is at the same time elected one of 3 secretaries of the Central Committee and a member of the Orgbureau. The other 2 party secretaries, Nikolai Krestinsky and Leonid Serebryakov, were both ill during 1920-21, which meant that Preobrazhensky carried most of the work and was, in effect, the, quote, real master of the party apparatus. This was the most powerful post Preobrazhensky ever held. During 1920 to 21, the staff employed by the Secretariat expanded to over 600, including a new section tasked with building up a card index that graded party members according to whether they were, quote, active and reliable, quote, promising, or, quote, rank and file. This system was later used by Joseph Stalin, who took over the Secretariat 2 years later to crush dissent within the party, which Preobrazhensky refused to do. Writing in Pravda on the 22nd of January 1921, Preobrazhensky declared that, quote, this possibility of greater freedom of criticism represents one of the conquests of the revolution, end quote. The 10th Party Congress in March 1921 was driven by a dispute over the role of the trade unions, in which Lenin and Trotsky were on opposite sides, with Preobrazhensky and the other secretaries backing Trotsky. The party was also shaken by the Kronstadt rebellion, in the light of which Lenin resolved to ban organized factions within the party. All three party secretaries were sacked and lost their membership of the Central Committee. In 1921, Preobrazhensky was appointed president of the party's Financial Committee and chief of the Directorate of Professional Training in the People's Commissariat of Education. Through the 1920s, Preobrazhensky was a leading Soviet economist, developing the plan for industrialization of the country and an opponent of the new economic policy. From 1924, Preobrazhensky was one of the editors of Pravda and a member of the board of People's Commissariat of Finance. Preobrazhensky was the original leader of the left opposition for a few months before Trotsky openly broke with Stalin after Lenin's death. Preobrazhensky was the main author and leader signatory of the Declaration of 46, which called for greater freedom of dissent within the Communist Party and attacked the leadership for having no strategy to deal with the current economic crisis. Preobrazhensky was also the author of the theory of primitive socialist accumulation, which argued that the state would have to lower the price of agricultural and increase the price of consumer goods to extract the capital needed to expand Soviet industry from the peasants, who made up 80% of the population. Preobrazhensky published a series of articles on the topic in the Bulletin of the Communist Academy in 1924. These ideas were later expanded at book length in a 1926 volume, The New Economics, and were the basic economic tenets of the left, or Trotskyist opposition, which brought Trotsky and Preobrazhensky together. Preobrazhensky visited Trotsky when he was in Berlin for medical treatment in 1926. A quote, interesting fact that Stalin noted in a letter to Molotov after it had been reported back to him by the OGPU. Preobrazhensky and Trotsky advocated for a rapid pace of industrialization in the context of the Soviet Union's new economic policy, arguing that the numerically limited Communist Party faced a grave danger of being swamped by the richest and most powerful individuals in the villages, the so-called kulaks, and the mass of peasants who might naturally follow these local leaders. Differential pricing needed to be used, the pair claimed, with relatively high retail prices charged for textiles and manufactured goods of utility to the rural population and comparatively low prices paid for agricultural products, thereby generating a surplus to finance industrial growth. This program was presented polemically in opposition to the policy of the Communist Party leadership, headed in this period by Stalin and Preobrazhensky's former collaborator in the book, The ABC of Communism, Nikolai Bukharin, who felt the rich peasantry to be under control and who advocated reducing prices and improving quality of textiles and manufactured goods to spur peasant production of grain and win the sympathy of the rural and urban working people for the task of socialist development. Trotsky's biographer Isaac Deutscher wrote, quote, a man of rare erudition and analytical gifts, Preobrazhensky was primarily a scholar, pursuing his line of reasoning no matter what unpopular conclusions it might lead him and no matter what damage it might do to his standing within the party. Preobrazhensky thought in elaborate and massive theorems. Many regard Preobrazhensky rather than Trotsky as the real author of the opposition's economic program. Preobrazhensky created at any rate its theoretical groundwork. There were, however, implicit divergences between Preobrazhensky and Trotsky's views, but these did not become explicit and result in serious political conflict until 1928, end quote. Victor Serge, who met Preobrazhensky in the 1920s, recalled that, quote, Preobrazhensky had driven himself so hard that during meetings it seemed that he might at any moment drop off to sleep, but his brain was still fresh and crammed with statistics, end quote. Victor Serge. In 1927, the United Opposition, which now excluded former foes, Grigory Zinoviev, Lev Kamenev, and their supporters, thrashed out a comprehensive platform summing up their criticisms of the party line, which Trotsky published while he was in exile. Under the title, The Real Situation in Russia, Trotsky demanded that the Central Committee publish and circulate it in time for it to be debated at the 15th Party Congress, which was to be held in December. Stalin fiercely insisted that this request be refused, but copies of the platform were produced and circulated in defiance of the party leadership. On the night of September 12, 13th, 1927, the OGPU raided a private house and uncovered a printing press, which had been used to print this and other opposition literature. They arrested the old Bolshevik Sergei Rakovsky, who was running the press, and announced that they had also caught a former officer who had fought against the Bolsheviks in the White Army of Baron Wrangel. The presence of the Wrangel officer was given huge publicity in the Soviet press to discredit the left, though when the Central Committee met in October, Stalin casually admitted that he was an OGPU informer. Rakovsky was expelled from the party with 11 others, and on the 28th of September, when their case came before the Central Control Commission, Preobrazhensky and Serebryakov submitted a statement seeking to refute the slander about a, quote, Wrangel officer, in which they admitted to a share of responsibility for the existence of the press. For that, they were expelled from the party early in October. It was the first time that expulsion had been used against eminent old Bolsheviks. On the 7th of November 1927, Preobrazhensky took part in a demonstration to mark the 10th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, but was attacked by a crowd as he tried to address the crowd from a balcony. In January 1928, Preobrazhensky was sent to the Ural Mountains and worked in the planning agencies. In April 1929, Preobrazhensky published an appeal entitled To All Comrades in Arms, in which, without repudiating the opposition's past, he argued that since Stalin had altered the party's course and had begun rapid industrialization of the Soviet economy, the opposition now had a duty to reconcile itself to the party line. In May, Preobrazhensky was allowed to travel to Moscow to negotiate the terms on which he and others might be allowed to return to the party. In June, Preobrazhensky was joined by Karl Radek and Ivar Smilga. On the 13th of July 1929, the three of them signed a letter in Pravda declaring that they had made a, quote, ideological and organizational break with Trotskyism, end quote. About 400 deportees followed their lead in asking to have their party membership restored. In January 1930, Preobrazhensky was restored to membership in the Communist Party and appointed to the Nizhny Novgorod Planning Committee. In 1932, Preobrazhensky was made a member of the board of the People's Commissariat of the Light Industry, acting head of the People's Commissariat of State Farms. On an unknown date, Preobrazhensky joined Ivan Smirnov's secret opposition group, which later, by the end of 1932, entered a bloc with Leon Trotsky and some others in the USSR. In 1933, Preobrazhensky was arrested by the OGPU, charged with membership of, quote, the counter-revolutionary Trotskyist group of Smirnov, I.N., Vaganyan, V.A. Preobrazhensky, E.A., and others, end quote. Preobrazhensky was sentenced to 3 years of exile and expelled from the party once again, but was admitted into the party later in 1933. In 1934, Preobrazhensky was one of the leading ex-oppositionists who were allowed to address the 17th Party Congress. Preobrazhensky said that he was, quote, ashamed to remember his part in the 7th of November 1927 demonstration, praised Stalin's, quote, tremendous insight and, quote, tremendous courage, and praised workers who, in the old days, ignored those who opposed Lenin and always backed him because that way, quote, you can't go wrong, end quote. Preobrazhensky was arrested a second time on the 20th of December 1936, but unlike Preobrazhensky's old comrades, such as Serebryakov, Rakovsky, Smirnov, and Vaganyan, he was not a defendant at any of the Moscow show trials, though Preobrazhensky must have been under the same pressure as they all were to make a false confession. Robert Conquest, the historian of the Great Purge, wrote that, quote, "So much more admirable, then, is the sense of truth and personal courage shown by men like Preobrazhensky, who even under the pressure of such arguments seems to have, quote, died in silence," end quote, end quote. Preobrazhensky was arrested again on the 2nd of January 1937. On the 13th of July 1937, Preobrazhensky was sentenced to death by a secret tribunal and shot the same day. Preobrazhensky was posthumously rehabilitated by the government of Mikhail Gorbachev on the 22nd of December 1988. Preobrazhensky argued in the new economic policy that the Soviet Union had to undertake the, quote, primitive accumulation that early capitalist societies had to. That is, the peasants' agricultural surplus had to be appropriated to invest in industry. Thus, the Soviet Union had to undertake by planning in socialist primitive accumulation what England had undergone by happenstance in the 17th century. This theory was criticized politically and associated with Trotsky and the left opposition, but it was arguably put into practice by Stalin in the 1930s, when Stalin said in a speech that the Soviet Union had to accomplish in a decade what England had taken centuries to do in terms of economic development, to be prepared for an invasion from the West. This argument is disputed by Trotskyists and Soviet historians, bracket, citation needed, end bracket. Back to the text. The causes of the transition from the first to the second period of the discussion are not entirely clear. Certainly, news of the opposition's statement circulated, possibly creating rumors unfavorable to the official leadership. Footnote: a resolution of the 13th Party Conference of January 1924 declared that Trotsky's letter of the 8th of October and the Declaration of the 46 immediately became, quote, the common property of wide circles of party members, end quote. Back to the text, end footnote. Perhaps there was pressure from inside leadership circles to go further than simple condemnation. Perhaps also the official leadership hoped to keep Trotsky isolated from the rest of the opposition by allowing various concessions. Whatever the reasons, on the 7th of November, the anniversary of the revolution, an article by Zinoviev appeared in Pravda, proclaiming the indispensability of giving, quote, practical application to workers' democracy within the party, end quote, and admitting that, quote, almost all very important questions go pre-decided from above downwards, end quote. An editorial footnote announced that Pravda would sponsor a debate on questions of party democracy. The second stage of the struggle began quietly and without the participation of prominent figures. Only near the end of November did the debate sharpen. Preobrazhensky declared in Pravda that since the introduction of the new economic policy, the party had been following, quote, an essentially incorrect line in the party's internal party policy, end quote. Preobrazhensky. Zinoviev and Stalin made speeches which, although of course declaring in favor of workers' democracy, carried real warnings to the opposition. Footnote: Preobrazhensky's article in Pravda, the 28th of November 1923, Zinoviev's speech of the 1st of December at the 14th Petrograd Provincial Party Conference warned against relaxing the ruling on factions. Published in Pravda, 7th of December 1923. Stalin's speech of the 2nd of December to an enlarged meeting of the Krasnaya Presnya District Party Committee called for the rejection of, quote, two extremes, that of wanting, quote, elections throughout, and that of, quote, demanding unlimited discussion, end quote. End footnote. By the beginning of December, the struggle had begun in earnest. Particularly in Moscow, opposition leaders at party meetings were finding considerable support, and the official leadership had become concerned enough to send its major figures to speak. During December, a committee of Kamenev, Stalin, and Trotsky, apparently established to find a compromise, produced a resolution which was passed by the Politburo and the Presidium of the Central Control Commission on the 5th of December. Footnote: Pravda, 7th of December 1923. The resolution titled On Party Structure was later accepted by the 13th Party Conference. In footnote: the resolution, which was long and detailed, bore evident signs of the influence of the left. Indeed, it was later referred to as a, quote, mistaken concession to Trotsky, end quote. Footnote: S.I. Gusev, at a session at the Central Control Commission in 1926, quoted by Trotsky in a declaration to the Politburo, 13th of August, 1926. End footnote. It began by outlining a series of negative tendencies, which stemmed from the contradictions of the new economic policy. These tendencies included, quote, the danger of a loss of perspective of socialist construction as a whole and of the world revolution, and ... the process of bureaucratization which is to be noted in the party apparatus, end quote. It was asserted that workers' democracy was necessary to counter these negative tendencies, and measures were outlined for achieving it. Above all, these included, quote, liberty of party life, end quote, and election of, quote, all leading party functionaries and commissions, ... by those bodies immediately under them, end quote. The resolution also urged better provision of information and education for the rank and file, more attention by the Central Control Commission to fighting, quote, bureaucratic perversion, and greater participation by all in party administration. Factions were condemned, but the party leadership was instructed not to regard every kind of criticism as an indication of the formation of factions. A practical recommendation made was that the next party congress should consider passing a rule that provincial and all Russian party conferences be held twice a year instead of annually. However, the main proposals of the resolution concerned recommendations about attitudes and practices which depended for their success on the way that they were interpreted and acted upon. As if to underline his success in having the resolution adopted, short-lived though his success was to be, Trotsky published his own interpretation of the resolution. Trotsky did this in the form of a letter to his party branch, expressing regrets for his absence from a meeting owing to illness. Footnote: the letter was dated 8th of December 1923. It was published in Pravda 11th of December and is to be found in Leon Trotsky's The New Course. End footnote. The letter ascribed, quote, exceptional significance, end quote, to the resolution, proclaiming that, quote, the new course, end quote, which it opened was to transfer, quote, the center of gravity, which was mistakenly placed in the apparatus by the old course, ... to the activity, the initiative, and critical spirit of all party members as the organized vanguard of the proletariat, end quote. Bureaucratism was doing considerable harm to the political education of the, quote, young communist generation, end quote. It was they, quote, the most reliable barometer of the party, end quote, who had reacted most sharply against bureaucratic practices. A democratic relationship between the old and young communist generations, later defined as the pre- and post-October party members, was required to preserve the party from bureaucratism. Trotsky offered the example of German social democracy to illustrate the historical possibility of degeneration of a, quote, revolutionary old guard, end quote. Above all else, the essential change required to guard against such degeneration was a change in, quote, the spirit that reigns in our organization, end quote. The second period of the struggle was concluded by meeting of the local party in Moscow on the 11th of December, attended by over 1,000 people. At this meeting, assessed by Carr as, quote, the last occasion of frank and fully reported debate capable of swaying opinion within the party, end quote, Kamenev made the opening speech. Kamenev admitted the need to renew party life in the apparatus and to abolish appointments in favor of elections. However, no groupings must be permitted, whether factional or not. Unlike Kamenev, Sopronov, the principal speaker for the opposition, freely referred to Trotsky, quoting him in support of his arguments. A general debate followed the two main speeches. Amongst others, Preobrazhensky, Radek, and Zinoviev spoke. Stalin, although apparently present, remained silent. Yaroslavsky was the only speaker to make a direct attack on Trotsky, an attack which was not well received. But Kamenev, in his concluding speech, regretted certain aspects of Trotsky's letter and called upon him to explain his attitude further. Wikipedia says Yemelyan Yaroslavsky lived from 1878 to 1943 and was a Bolshevik revolutionary Communist Party functionary, journalist, and historian. An atheist and anti-religious polemicist, Yaroslavsky served as editor of the atheist satirical magazine The Godless and led the League of the Militant Godless organization. Yaroslavsky also headed the anti-religious committee of the Central Committee. In Yaroslavsky's book, How Gods and Goddesses Are Born, Live and Die, in 1923, Yaroslavsky argued that religion was born under man, lived under man, and would die under communism. Back to the text. Within days of this meeting, the relative freedom of discussion allowed there had given way to repression. Again, the reasons for the timing of the change are not entirely clear. Perhaps it is best explained by the hypothesis that the official leadership had hoped that the resolution of the 5th of December would satisfy both Trotsky and the opposition, and that they would relax their critical posture, but ensuing events proved this to be a false hope. Footnote: Trotsky's letter was later referred to as, quote, a platform advanced in opposition to the Central Committee resolution, end quote, immediately after that resolution had been unanimously accepted. Trotsky's relative inactivity made this a propitious time for the official leadership to strike. End footnote. Trotsky himself suggested that the change in attitude may have been due to Zinoviev forcing an attack of sufficient momentum to compel Stalin to join in, and thus preventing a compromise between Stalin and Trotsky being made at Zinoviev's expense. Footnote: see Trotsky's Stalin. End footnote. Whatever the reason for the timing of the change itself is not surprising, given the split between the official leadership and the opposition, which had only been papered over by the resolution of the 5th of December. The third period of the struggle, prefaced by growing criticism in Pravda, was launched by Stalin in an article in Pravda on the 15th of December and in a speech made by Zinoviev on the same day. Footnote: Zinoviev's speech to a Petrograd Party conference attended by over 3,000 people is in Pravda, 20th to the 21st of December 1923. In contrast to the Moscow meeting, only the speech of the major official figure, Zinoviev, was reported in Pravda. End footnote. A particular feature of this period was the attack on Trotsky. Previously, Trotsky had not been selected for special criticism. Now, however, the official leadership mounted an attack unfettered by political principle. Typical of such an approach was Bukharin's serialized Pravda article titled Down with Factionalism, which accompanied Trotsky's articles Groups and Factional Formations and The Question of Party or Generations. Footnote: Trotsky's articles were published in Pravda on the 28th and 29th of December. One second. They were later included. Sorry about that. That's probably it. I was hitting the microphone there. Bukharin's article was published in Pravda on the 28th, 29th, and 30th of December 1923, and one and 1st and 4th of January 1924, it appeared as an unsigned article. Stalin stated that the author was Bukharin. End footnote. Bukharin accused, quote, the faction of Trotsky, Sopronov, and Preobrazhensky, end quote, of departing from Leninism on questions of internal party policy. Hinting at Trotsky's former Menshevik associations, Bukharin asserted, quote, Bolshevism has always distinguished itself from the formal democratism of the Mensheviks. ... Bolshevism does not conceal from the party and the working class the fact that the party is led by leaders. ... The more conscious led the less conscious. ... Lead the less conscious. ... The less conscious and less active become more and more conscious and active. These internal mechanisms constitute real democratism, end quote, Bukharin. Besides not understanding, quote, real democratism, end quote, Trotsky failed to understand that the, quote, mass psychology, end quote, of the peasants, and in the three major debates since October, the Brest-Litovsk crisis, the trade union debate, and the present controversy, Trotsky had advocated a solution out of touch with reality. Footnote. Irony is added to the coarseness of Bukharin's attack if one remembers Bukharin's position on the first two of these issues. That is actually what I was thinking that's actually what I was thinking in when I read that just now. To make my I'm so smart. I'm a genius. The decisive condemnation of Trotsky and the opposition, which ended the first stage of the struggle of the left opposition, was made at the 13th Party Conference in January 1924. Again, Trotsky was not present due to continued illness, and Preobrazhensky made the major speeches for the opposition. The official leadership condemned the opposition in the same terms as previously, and produced a resolution declaring that the opposition represented, quote, not only an attempt at revision of Bolshevism, not only a direct aberration from Leninism, but also a blatant petite bourgeois deviation, end quote. The resolution, among other things, called for measures to preserve, quote, an iron Bolshevik discipline, end quote, identified the conference with the resolution of the 10th Party Congress banning factions, and publicized the previously secret point, even that of that resolution, which provided for the expulsion of both ordinary members and members of the Central Committee for, quote, any breach of discipline or revival or toleration of factionalism, end quote. The resolution concluded by declaring the discussion closed and called on all party organizations to proceed to active work. New section, the issues. In 1923, questions of economic policy and international revolution helped give rise to the debate and deepened it in various ways. These were, however, of secondary importance compared to questions of party democracy, which were given very considerable attention in their own right. This contrasted the later situation of 1926 to 27, when the left opposition virtually always raised the issues of decision-making in connection with the actual decisions made, concentrating in particular on the, quote, hardening of the NEP and the subordination of Comintern policy to the demands of socialism in one country. No doubt this was due in part to a changed analysis. In 1923, the opposition was discussing bureaucratism and the growth of bureaucracy as a system of administration. By 1926, it was beginning to assert the existence of a bureaucracy as an ossifying party leadership, maintaining itself by the exercise of power. The progression from bureaucratism to bureaucracy in the analysis of the left opposition assisted the transition to a more comprehensive and interlinked analysis by pointing to bureaucracy as the central political factor which conditioned policy in all spheres. Another contrast between the left opposition at different stages is that, unlike the opposition of 1926 to 27, the opposition of 1923 never published a program. This reflected the fact that the opposition was in its formative stages. Apparently, in 1923, it existed without any form of internal discipline. In many ways, the opposition in that year was a much more informal body than it later became. At this stage, far from the organized and subversive force as it was later characterized, the opposition was a relatively loose collection of individuals grouping together on the specific question of internal party democracy. Footnote. Divisions on issues relating to party democracy were mirrored by those relating to economic policy, with the opposition in general calling for more widespread and efficient planning as a way out of the, quote, scissors impasse. Divisions over the issue of the attempted German Revolution were distorted in various ways to exploit the situation in favor of the official leadership, in particular Zinoviev. Unlike the economic situation where there were real and defined differences, the, quote, German question was of importance because it raised doubts about the political capabilities of the official leadership, and because it raised the general level of tension. It also underlined the dangers to the troika of Trotsky's support in the Comintern, and it provided an exploitable situation. End footnote. Another footnote. The relative looseness of this group is shown by the fact that 43 of the signatories of the Declaration of the 46 signed it with reservations. 11 different reservations are expressed. End footnote. The nearest it came to a program was the Declaration of the 46. The Declaration of the 46 contented itself with a call for the abolition of the regime existing in the party, quote, in the first instance by those who have created it, end quote, and for its replacement by, quote, a regime of comradely unity and internal party democracy, end quote. It offered no suggestions as to how this was to be attained, merely positing, quote, as a first and urgent step, end quote, the calling of a conference of the Central Committee with, quote, the most prominent and active party workers, end quote, and including, quote, comrades holding views on the situation different from the views of the majority of the Central Committee, end quote. Since the opposition lacked a definitive program, in order to assess its ideas, one must look to the speeches, articles, and resolutions put by various individuals. Prominent among these individuals was Preobrazhensky, who often took the role of spokesman for the opposition. In the course of leading the defense of the action of the 46 at the enlarged plenum of the Central Committee in October, Preobrazhensky presented a resolution, later repeated in his speech to the 13th Party Conference. Where am I? This resolution, described by Carr as, quote, the most consistent statement of what the opposition meant at this time by workers' democracy, end quote, is reproduced in full as an appendix to this article. The pleas it made for freedom of discussion and criticism without reprisal and for freedom of elections are typical of opposition statements at this time. During the period of concessions, the official leadership met the opposition's demand for internal party democracy with agreement that change was necessary. This created a problem for the opposition. On the issue of what to do about bureaucratism, they found themselves apparently in alliance with the official leadership. The situation might well have confused some members of the party's rank and file. Indeed, one railway worker at the Moscow party meeting of the 11th of December declared, quote, the workers will ask me what your fundamental differences are. To speak frankly, I do not know how to answer, end quote. However, there were real differences in the positions of opposition and official leadership, even if these were somewhat obscure to the party's rank and file. The opposition considered bureaucratism as the antithesis of workers' democracy, and viewed it as a fundamental problem, the overcoming of which was of paramount importance. The official leadership in general asserted that the opposition's criticisms were heavily exaggerated, but rather grudgingly admitted that perhaps there was too much red tape, too much appointment, and not enough election, and perhaps discussion did not take place freely as discussion ought to. The opposition tended to consider that bureaucratism had become a serious problem since the introduction of the new economic policy, and that, in many ways, it was strengthened by the contradictions of the new economic policy. The official leadership preferred to view bureaucratism as a hangover from war communism, although admitting that the NEP could exert negative influences on the party. At the root of the differences between the opposition and the official leadership, there were different conceptions of the respective roles of leaders and rank and file in the party. The opposition stressed the need for freedom of criticism and interaction, both between leaders and led, and between experienced and youthful members, within a framework of democracy. A major task of the leadership was the coordination and distillation of the experiences of different sections of the party. However, in view of the official leadership, the primary task of leaders was to issue directives. The role of the party's rank and file was to be an obedient transmission belt. The opposition was seriously concerned that careerism, subservience, and a reliance on tradition would threaten the flexibility that the party required if it was to be able to adopt new policies when necessary. Without freedom of discussion and criticism, the party's rank and file would be inhibited. The result would be a reluctance to criticize policies that they were called upon to implement, and a distortion of information reaching the leaders from below. The official leadership countered its critics by referring to the past exploits and the traditions of the party, suggesting that these guarantee the correct formulation of policy in the future. Footnote, for example, Kamenev's speech reported by Pravda 13th of December 1923 and Stalin's article in Pravda 15th of December 1923. On one issue in particular, the opposition and the official leadership were split and remained so. This was the issue of factions. The opposition called for a precise definition of the ruling on factions, asserting that not all groups constituted factions, and that group expression of opinion in certain forms was both desirable and inevitable. It also took the view that a repressive regime in the party was itself a cause of factionalism, since discussion would allow the airing and resolution of grievances and dissent. Suppression only resulted in clandestine maneuvers. Furthermore, the opposition asserted that the present leadership was, in fact, a faction which employed the power of transfer and disciplinary procedures in its own factional interest. The official leadership denied these claims, admitting only that treating every criticism as factionalism would lead to factions. The official leadership asserted that any relaxation of the ruling on factions would tend towards splitting up the party, and the opening of the party to diverse social interests would be very dangerous in the situation of the new economic policy. The opposition accepted that factions might become spokesmen for non-proletarian class interests, but asserted that this applied equally to the leadership faction, since bureaucratism threatened to detach the party from the masses. In its turn, the official leadership characterized the opposition as a petite bourgeois faction, thereby referring implicitly to the influence of the new economic policy. The question of factions, described by Trotsky as, quote, the pivot of the discussion, end quote, became critical because of this point. On this point, the differences between the two sides crystallized. According to a strict reading, the 10th Party Congress resolution on party unity differentiated between the factions and groupings. One second. I want to see if I can find something on this piece. What was I looking for? The resolution on party unity says the dissolution of all factions was ordered by the Congress. The Congress also gave the Central Committee the power to apply discipline against factional activity, including party expulsion. Anyway. Nevertheless, all forms of group criticism were effective. Or back to the text. Nevertheless, all forms of group criticism were effectively illegal, partly because the official leadership held the power to define and punish factions. Recommendations on free discussion and elections remained formal and could only acquire meaning at the discretion of the leadership. although by itself a resolution redefining factions according to the wishes of the opposition in no way guaranteed freedom of group criticism. It was a first step in this direction. Even during the period of concessions, the official leadership would not concede this point. The refusal of the official leadership to permit any revision or redefinition of the statute on factions indicate its views on the limits of party democracy. The rank and file were free to have all the elections and discussions that it liked, provided the elections resulted in the selection of the leadership's candidate. The increasing practice of effectively restricting the field to one candidate ensured this, provided the leadership controlled the form and limits of the discussion. Against this attitude, the opposition vainly repeated its warnings of the dangers of bureaucratism. New section, Strengths and Weaknesses. There can be no doubt that the challenge of the opposition carried behind it some force. This is shown by the fact that the leadership was prepared to make concessions. Although without doubt sections of the leadership were sensitive to and seriously concerned about the charges of bureaucratism, these concessions cannot be regarded as freely given because they followed and preceded periods of repression. It is not possible to be precise about the strength of the opposition. However, some indications of the numerical level and occupational and geographical areas of strength may be given. The resolution of the 13th Party Conference condemning the opposition was accepted with only 3 votes against out of 128 voting delegates. Footnote. Oh, sorry, that's something in Russian. However, not even spokesmen of the official leadership asserted that this accurately reflected the strength of the opposition. In the course of the conference debate, Rykov declared that the struggle, quote, brought the Moscow organization to the verge of a split, end quote. Opposition representation at the conference was undoubtedly reduced by the pressure of the apparatus during elections. Sopronov, in a speech to the conference, gave an illustration of how the strength of the opposition was limited during the process of indirect election. The opposition had won 36% of the representation at district conferences in Moscow province. From these district conferences, they received only 18% of the vote for delegates to the provincial conference, which then elected delegates to the All-Russian conference. Sopronov suggested that the opposition had a majority at cell level throughout the province. I'm going to read the Wikipedia for Timofey Sopronov. Timofey Sopronov lived from 1887 to 1937. Sopronov was a Russian revolutionary, old Bolshevik and socialist militant who was one of the leaders of the left opposition in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Timofey Sopronov was born in Mostushka Tula Governorate in a family of Russian peasants. According to an autobiographical essay, Timofey Sopronov wrote in the 1920s for the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, Sopranov's family lived in a hut with a roof that leaked, and when he started school age 7, his clothes were so ragged that the other children nicknamed him, quote, the beggar. Bracket citation needed. From the age of 15, Sopronov worked as a painter. Timofey Sopronov took part in street demonstrations in Moscow during the 1905 revolution, but the revolution had been suppressed. Timofey Sopronov wrote, quote, my search for some kind of organization among construction workers was in vain, and I had no choice but to work alone, end quote. Bracket citation needed. In 1912, Timofey Sopronov learned about the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party from reading Pravda and created a Bolshevik group among other colleagues and founded a builders' union. In 1916, he was drafted into the Russian army for the war with Germany but was discharged because of illness. Timofey Sopronov then lived illegally as an itinerant Bolshevik organizer. During the Russian Revolution, Timofey Sopronov was based in Moscow, where Timofey Sopronov was a member of the military committee of the Bolshevik faction of the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, a delegate to the short-lived Constituent Assembly, and chairman of the provincial executive from October 1917 to December 1919, after which Sopronov was transferred to Kharkiv after the Red Army had driven the White Army of General Denikin out of the city to take over as chairman of the executive committee. In 1920 to 21, Timofey Sopronov was chairman of the Building Workers Union. In 1921 to 23, he was deputy chairman of the Supreme Economic Council. In 1922 to 24, Timofey Sopronov was a member of the Central Committee. In 1925 to 27, Timofey Sopronov worked for the Public Works Commission, which granted lenient licenses to foreign companies. In opposition, in 1918, Sopronov supported the left communists who opposed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk and was part of the left opposition from then on. Timofey Sopronov was a founder of the Moscow-based group known as the Democratic Centralists, or Desists. Most of its leaders, such as Vladimir Smirnov and Valerian Osinsky, were university-educated intellectuals. Timofey Sopronov was the only prominent member from a working-class background. Despite calling themselves, quote, centralists, the Democratic Centralists campaigned persistently against over-centralization and was criticized by the party leadership for being excessively decentralist. While he was based in Kharkiv, Sopronov captured control of the party organization, expanded the membership, and dominated the Fourth Ukrainian Party Conference in March 1920, securing a left-wing majority. But when Sopronov and Osinsky presented a set of theses to the Ninth Party Congress in Moscow later that month, they were heavily outvoted, after Lenin had pronounced that their submission was, quote, nothing but theoretical blunders, end quote. The Democratic Centralists continued to campaign against the bureaucratic methods of the party throughout the early 20s as part of the so-called 1923 opposition. Despite this, Sopronov remained a leading figure and chairman of the Public Works Committee, a member of the Central Executive Committee, and was a pallbearer at Lenin's funeral. Timofey Sopronov, along with Osinsky, Smirnov, and Drobnis, signed the Declaration of 46 and later adhered to the left opposition, albeit as a separate grouping considered ultra-left within it. Sopronov helped lay the groundwork for the united opposition of the Trotskyist and Zinoviite factions in 1926, but he and the former Democratic Centralists remained ultra-left, declaring in the statement of the Group of 15 that the Soviet Union was no longer a worker state and that capitalism had been restored. They also, quote, denied the necessity for the defense of the Soviet Union, end quote, according to Leon Trotsky addressing the Dewey Commission. Sopronov was expelled from the party at the 15th Party Congress in December 1927 and sentenced to 3 years exile in Arkhangelsk. When the decision was reported to them, Sopronov and Smirnov signed a protest claiming that they did not know what they were accused of and that, quote, the OGPU does not and cannot have any facts about our anti-Soviet work. Our work of late has been to defend within the party our views set out in the platform of the 15, ... end quote. In December 1931, Sopronov wrote an 11-page essay entitled The Agony of the Petty Bourgeois Dictatorship, in which he said that, quote, police methods had been used to force the peasants onto collective farms, creating, quote, a kind of ugly state capitalism, end quote, and that, quote, to call such an economy socialist means committing a crime against the working class, end quote. This essay was obtained by the NKVD, and in April 1935, Smirnov, Sopronov, and Sopronov's wife, Natalia Maish, were brought to Moscow and accused of counter-revolutionary conspiracy. Sopronov was sentenced to 5 years in prison. On the 27th of September 1937, during the Great Purge, Timofey Sopronov was taken from prison and sentenced to death. Sopronov was executed the following day. Sopronov was posthumously rehabilitated on the 20th of June 1989. Natalia Maish, who was born in 1902, was arrested in 1929 and exiled with her husband. She was arrested in December 1936 and the following July was sentenced to 10 years in the Gulag. After her release, she was deported to Alma-Ata, which is where Trotsky was deported to initially, Almaty region of Kazakhstan, where Natalia Maish was arrested again in August 1948 and sentenced to another 10 years in labor camps. Natalia Maish was released in 1955 and, quote, rehabilitated in December 1956. Let me blow my nose real quick. Excuse me. Besides considerable strength in Moscow, this is back to the text, perhaps even an actual majority, the opposition had managed to capture party organizations in Ryazan, Penza, Kaluga, Simbirsk, and Chelyabinsk. The opposition's strength in these provincial towns was plausibly attributed to there being in those centers a predominance of party officials transferred as a reprisal for their dissident opinions. In Moscow, the strength of the opposition lay in the state administration, partly in economic bodies and student cells. The opposition was comparatively weak amongst the working class. No doubt this was partly a result of the past record of various members of the opposition on questions of industrial management, and also partly because questions of immediate working class interest, such as wages, were not given any prominence. Whatever the reasons, in Moscow at a time when it was gaining majorities among the students, the opposition could only win 67 out of 346 cells of industrial workers. A simple comparison of voting figures does not give an adequate picture of the opposition's strengths and weaknesses. Even as early as 1923, members of the opposition were subject to various forms of reprisal and discrimination. Workers could lose their jobs, students be expelled from the universities, and party and state functionaries be removed by transfer from positions of influence and responsibility. This tended to mean that there was no passive membership of the opposition, whereas the vast bulk of support for the official leadership was passive. The leadership was supported simply because the leadership was the leadership. Thus, a comparison of support by voting figures is misleading. At the level of active and prominent members of the opposition as against active and prominent members of the official leadership, the comparison in terms of numbers would have been much more even. However, it was power rather than numbers that counted. The official leadership controlled the party apparatus and means of communication. The opposition had no independent paper or access to any means of communication. The rank and file of the party outside Moscow depended on the party press and the local secretaries for their sources of information. With these firmly in the control of the official leadership, it is most unlikely that the bulk of the party members even understood the issues at stake. The opposition could be and was freely portrayed as wanting to do away with the apparatus and allow all sorts of competing factions and groups, if only as a cover for its own ambitions. Pravda, although for a comparatively short period giving space to the opposition, was firmly under the control of the official leadership and served its interest. After the 15th of December, this was increasingly apparent from the content of the articles and reports published. Footnote: during December, two sub-editors of Pravda who had been responsible for the, quote, party life section, in which many articles critical of the Central Committee had appeared, were dropped after the intervention of Zinoviev. The change of attitude in Pravda brought an unsuccessful protest from Trotsky, Radek, and Pyatakov. End footnote. Besides controlling Pravda, the official leadership was able to prevent the publication of the Declaration of the 46, as well as hinder and delay publication of Trotsky's new course. Footnote: publication of the Declaration of the 46 was prohibited on the grounds that it was the platform of an illegal faction. The obstacles put in the way of Trotsky's new course are indicated by Max Eastman in his book Since Lenin Died, and Boris Souverin, Stalin. Trotsky's new course was his major contribution to the party debate. Besides his letter of the 8th of December and the few articles he published in Pravda during December 1923, it contains additional chapters which provide an incisive analysis of bureaucratism. In particular, bureaucratism is treated as a social phenomenon, not as an accidental feature of party administration, nor as consisting only of the, quote, bad habits of office holders, end quote. The new economic policy promoted bureaucratism in a number of ways. For example, by forcing the attention of the party to matters of administration, state and party links, and the tempo of the development were important in this respect, and by its tolerance of non-proletarian social groups and classes. End footnote. It must be remembered that the bulk of party members were newly recruited with no pre-revolutionary experience and very little political education, although elements of the rank and file might have been concerned about bureaucratic practices on the basis of their own experience. The statements of the official leadership in favor of democracy would have reduced this concern. On the one issue, there was very clear differentiation: the question of factions. The official leadership could appeal rather emotively for unity on the basis of Lenin's resolution on party discipline at a critical stage of the revolution, and call for action rather than interminable factional wranglings. It is not surprising that the opposition enjoyed comparatively little support outside Moscow. In the capital, they could, to some extent, short-circuit the official leadership's control of communications by personal intervention. However, even in Moscow, the official leadership was able to bring pressure through the apparatus, and especially through secretaries of party committees, to ensure the defeat of the opposition. New section: the question of tactics and the dilemma of the opposition. Various writers have asserted that Trotsky and the opposition compounded their problems by tactical errors. Trotsky, for instance, should have taken a more aggressive attitude and brought his differences into the open at the 12th Party Congress in April 1923, and the opposition should have organized itself as a faction, which in any case it was accused of doing. Footnote: see Eastman, Souverin, Carr, Daniels, and Deutscher, who all make tactical criticisms. End footnote. I want to read the Wikipedia for the 12th Congress of the Russian Communist Party. The 12th Congress of the Russian Communist Party was held during the 17th to the 25th of April 1923 in Moscow. The Congress elected the 12th Central Committee. It was attended by 408 delegates with deciding votes and 417 with consultative votes, representing 386,000 party members. This is the last Congress of the Russian Communist Party Bolsheviks during Vladimir Lenin's leadership, though Lenin was unable to attend due to illness. Agenda: the Central Committee Political Report, the Central Committee Organizational Report. Let me repeat that. The Central Committee Political Report by Grigory Zinoviev, the Central Committee Organizational Report, Joseph Stalin, Report of the Auditing Commission, Viktor Nogin, Report of the Central Control Commission, Matvei Shkiryatov, Report of the Russian representation in the Comintern Executive Committee, Nikolai Bukharin, about industry, Leon Trotsky, national ethnic-based issues in party and state development, Joseph Stalin, tax policy in rural areas, Lev Kamenev, Mikhail Kalinin, Grigory Sokolnikov, about establishment of districts, Alexei Rykov, election of the party's central offices, Much of this Congress was taken up with Joseph Stalin's struggle against the Georgian Bolsheviks. Stalin dominated the Congress with Grigory Ordzhonikidze and Mamia Orakelashvili, moving against the old Bolsheviks Budu Divani and Philippe Makaradze. Stalin accused the latter of the following, quote, violation of party discipline, end quote, namely contact Lenin directly, not through party channels, quote, disobeying decisions of the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party Bolsheviks, end quote, quote, demanding special economic concessions for Georgia, end quote, quote, local chauvinism, and quote, imperialism, as they were accused of oppressing smaller nations such as the Ossetians and Abkhazians, and, quote, the desire to obtain privileged positions for Georgians, end quote. Ordzhonikidze went further, quote, collaboration with the Mensheviks during 1918 to 1920, quote, retaining class enemies, landlords in the Georgian Communist Party, quote, granting political amnesty to the Mensheviks, and, quote, leftism, and, quote, adventurism. Mirsayet Sultangaliev attended this Congress, but he was subject to attack immediately afterwards in the Tartar newspaper Eshcha and arrested during May 1923. He was roundly condemned by Stalin at the Fourth Conference of the Central Committee of the Russian Communist Party with the workers of the national republics of the regions, held from the 9th to the 12th of June 1923. At this Congress, the Russian Communist Party Bolsheviks redefined the problems of nationalism, identifying local chauvinism as the main problem, and rather Great Russian chauvinism. The Congress was the beginning of the so-called policy of Kurenizatsiya. The main idea was to grow national cadres for every nationality so that the party line could be pursued everywhere by representatives of the local nationality, and the national proletariat could be raised against its own exploiters. Back to the text. It is beyond the scope of this article to examine in detail these criticisms, although it must be admitted that they may contribute to an explanation of the defeat of the 1923 opposition. However, the dilemma of the opposition should not be ignored. The opposition accepted, apparently unanimously, that the party was capable of reform, and it therefore addressed its appeal to the party. Footnote: agreement on reform provides a contrast with at least one section of the opposition in 1927, the Democratic Centralists, led by Sopronov and Smirnov, both one-time members of the 46, who called for the formation of a second party. End footnote. It acted in what it obviously regarded as a principled manner, denying the accusation that it constituted a faction and refraining from publishing a platform illicitly. However, a basic premise of the arguments of the opposition was that the official leadership was manipulating party administration and discipline in its own interest. Even though the opposition made it clear that it was not attempting to oust the present leadership, those in power were hardly likely to take criticism in the same fraternal spirit in which it was offered. Thus, the opposition was confronted by a dilemma which it was never able to resolve. Various reasons can be advanced for the decision of the opposition to press for reform and to remain within the confines of party discipline, although it must have realized that it would be confronted by the power of the apparatus. To some extent, the decision was probably based on a fear of the consequences of splitting the party. Indeed, the opposition of 1926 divided on this issue, with the Trotskyist element continuing to maintain that the main danger was a bourgeois restoration, promoted by forces outside the party, and thus refusing to act as an alternative party. Also, the opposition lacked an organizational base from which to launch an effective attack. Nevertheless, whatever the significance of these two factors, the opposition had no special reason to regard its situation as hopeless. Only with hindsight can the question of tactics be given special significance. There's a footnote that I think I missed that says, quote, however much we differ from them, ... we assume that the present leaders could not in any conditions fail to be appointed by the party to the outstanding post in the workers' dictatorship, end quote. The Declaration of the 46, end footnote. Even after the German defeat, the international situation could not be viewed as totally unfavorable. Much of Europe was still in a state of political and economic instability, and in China there were already portents of the coming revolutionary situation. Internally, the party, by virtue of its political consciousness and inherited traditions, its base in the working class, and its control of the economy, remained the only revolutionary body. Although these factors had their negative sides, the opposition could realistically hope for some support from sections of the party previously uncommitted to its policies. Footnote. There were some indications that concern about party democracy went beyond the ranks of the opposition. Preobrazhensky, president of the GPU, declared in September, quote, the dying out of our party, the dying out of our party's internal life, the prevalence of nomination instead of election is becoming a political danger and is paralyzing our party and its political leadership of the working class, end quote. Quoted by Kamenev from a speech on the 11th of December, published in Pravda, 13th of December, 1923. At about the same time, Bukharin made a speech in which Bukharin complained in strong terms about the restrictions on discussion and elections. Back to the text, end footnote. Not back to the text, end footnote. However, as the struggle developed, the apparatus showed the extent to which the apparatus's power could control the effects of the effectiveness of the opposition, especially the opposition's ability to put its program to the party's rank and file, a factor which could not have been obvious before struggle began. It also became apparent that the incumbent leadership would not tolerate any threat to its position. Zinoviev and Kamenev and later Bukharin in time were to plead for democracy, but only after they had been ousted from positions of effective influence. Footnote. Not without some justification, Trotsky was also accused of becoming interested in democratization only when his position was threatened. See Shlepnikov's article in Pravda on the 19th of January 1924. End footnote. At this juncture, they felt unable to give real meaning to party democracy. Whether this was through distrust of the political consciousness of the newly recruited members, the vast majority of the party, and a preference for the political experience of the old guard, or whether through antipathy and distrust of Trotsky, a factor not without consequence, their reluctance to concede any ground on this question led to the defeat of the 1923 opposition, as well as to their own subsequent demotion. Excuse me, I'm sick. Without concessions from above, the opposition was faced with very considerable problems. The activity and power of the apparatus was based on the passivity of the rank and file, which, as the opposition was well aware, arose from the objective situation. The general decline of working-class consciousness and self-activity related to various factors, historical, international, economic, and the development of the party post-1917, but was also promoted and indefinitely maintained by the apparatus itself. This passivity could be broken only by a changed objective situation, over which the opposition had no direct power, or an internal regeneration which encouraged political education and activity. The objective situation could not be left to itself to develop in a direction favorable to the proletariat. However, in the view of the opposition, the adoption of appropriate policy depended on curbing the effects of bureaucratism. Thus, in the short term at least, a changed objective situation necessarily required internal regeneration. But this, in its turn, required certain concessions from above, if all information filtered to the rank and file through the apparatus. If all sympathizers in support of the opposition were rooted out from positions of influence on the rank and file, and if the apparatus prevented the active participation of the rank and file in party political life, then such a regeneration on a broad scale became unlikely. The argument leads back to the question of tactics. The opposition was forced with the choice of persistently raising questions of party policy and hoping for concessions from above, or presenting itself as an alternative party leadership, disregarding the limits of party discipline as set by its opponents, and if necessary, attempting to seize power. For various reasons, among which one might include the hypothesis that not even the opposition was fully aware of the dangers of bureaucratism, the former tactics were pursued. Perhaps the defeat of the opposition in retrospect damns these tactics. Nevertheless, it should be remembered that although it was a necessary first step, political regeneration of the party without a changed objective situation would tend to be partial, existing in something of a vacuum, and always threatened by contradictions deriving from the force of circumstances, isolation in particular. Trotsky and the opposition, with few exceptions, refused to take steps which the consequences were unforeseeable, the implications of which in 1923 were largely unthinkable. In a situation which did not appear hopeless, and which in any case might only lead to the opposition being forced to manage the isolated Soviet state. That's the end of the actual article, and here are, there's an appendix to it, but there's appendices to it, or an appendix to it. And the appendix is by Preobrazhensky. And it says, Preobrazhensky's resolution on party democracy. This is from 1924. In order to carry into effect the resolution of the 10th Party Congress on party work and to realize the principles of workers' democracy and party life, it is necessary to put into practice the following measures. 1. It is necessary to implement in reality a number of resolutions on drawing into active work the party periphery, which must be not only a transmission belt from the highest party organs to the working masses, but also the very sphere where party and social opinion is formed on the basis of the link with the masses. It is necessary that broad discussion of all important questions of party, political, and economic life takes place in all party organizations, with permission to raise in discussion party questions, not only on the recommendation of party committees, but also on the initiative of the cells themselves, and also of individual comrades. 2. It is necessary to remove, in fact, the ban on discussion, which is the basic form of party criticism, and in particular to revive discussion in the party clubs and the party press. 3. It is necessary to secure effective, permanent control by the public opinion of the party over the work of leading organs, by means of systematic accounts of party committees before local cells and general party assemblies. It is necessary to stop the practice of appointing from above of the leaders of the party organs, and to reestablish the principle of election of executive party organs and office holders which always existed in the party. 5. It is necessary to cease the existing system of selection of party workers, which is based not only on the degree of their fitness in this or that job, but on the degree of their submissiveness to directives. This system gives rise in the party to negative phenomena in the form of subservience and careerism. In order to combat these undesired phenomena, it is necessary to change in essence the work of the Credentials Commission. It is necessary to revive transfers of personnel which took place according to the requirements of struggle with dissenting comrades, to reverse those transfers which were, and still are, especially harmful for our party work. Resolution put to the enlarged plenary session of the Central Committee and the Central Control Commission, 25th of the 27th of October, 1923. And that is the end of the appendix, and you should stop listening whenever you feel like it. However, I am going to read the Wikipedia for the left opposition to kind of reinforce some of the things that I may have learned in this piece, or the things that I didn't, in fact, learn. The left opposition was a faction within the Russian Communist Party from the 23rd to the 1923 to the 1927, headed de facto by Leon Trotsky. The left opposition was formed by Trotsky to mount a struggle against the perceived bureaucratic degeneration within the party leadership, headed by Stalin during the serious illness of the Bolshevik founder Vladimir Lenin and after Lenin's death in January 1924. It seems like it was actually initiated by Preobrazhensky, if this article is true. The left opposition advocated for a program of rapid industrialization, voluntary collectivization of agriculture, and the expansion of a workers' democracy. Intellectuals who had previously lived in exile during the Tsarist era would constitute the core of the left opposition during the succession period. Members represented the most internationalist elements of the party and held offices of the highest responsibility, with Christian Rakovsky, Adolf Joffa, and Nikolai Krestinsky holding ambassadorial posts in London, Paris, Tokyo, and Berlin. Originally, the battle lines were drawn between Trotsky and Trotsky's supporters who signed the Declaration of 46 in October 1923 on the one hand, and a triumvirate, also known by its Russian name Troika, of Communist International Comintern Chairman Grigory Zinoviev, Communist Party General Secretary Joseph Stalin, and Politburo Chairman Lev Kamenev on the other hand. The left opposition argued that the new economic policy had weakened the Soviet Union by allowing the private sector to achieve an increasingly important position in the Soviet economy, while in their opinion, the centrally planned, socialized sector of the economy languished, including the mostly state-run heavy industries, which were seen as essentially not only for continued industrialization, but also defense. The platform called for the state to adopt a program for mass industrialization and to encourage the mechanization and collectivization of agriculture, thereby developing the means of production and helping the Soviet Union move towards parity with Western capitalist countries, which would also increase the proportion of the economy which is part of the socialized sector of the economy, and definitively shift the Soviet Union towards a socialist mode of production. There was also the right opposition, which was led by the leading party theoretician and Pravda editor Nikolai Bukharin and supported by Sovnarkom chairman Prime Minister Alexei Rykov and chairman of the All-Union Central Council of Trade Unions Mikhail Tomsky. In late 1924, as Stalin proposed his new socialism in one country theory, Stalin drew closer to the right opposition, and his triumvirate with Grigory Zinoviev and Lev Kamenev slowly broke up over the next year. Zinoviev and Kamenev were both executed in 1936. The right opposition were allied to Stalin's center from 1924 until their alliance broke up in the years from 1928 to 1930 over strategy towards the kulaks and Netman. Trotsky and his supporters in the left opposition were joined by the group of democratic centralism to form the united or joint opposition. The first confrontation between the left opposition and the triumvirate occurred from October 1923 to January 1924 over industrialization policies. The triumvirate won decisively at the 13th Party Congress in January 1924. Following Lenin's death in January 1924, the confrontation between the left opposition and the triumvirate expanded more openly into a dispute over Trotsky's policies, with the triumvirate accusing Trotsky's policies of being, quote, anti-Leninist. At the 13th Communist Party Congress in May 1924, the triumvirate's position was further strengthened at the left opposition's expense. Another confrontation took place from October to December 1924 during the so-called, quote, literary discussion and criticism of Trotsky's permanent revolution policy as Stalin proposed socialism in one country. This resulted in the removal of Trotsky from Trotsky's ministerial post on the 6th of January 1925, although Stalin opposed Zinoviev's demand that Trotsky be expelled from the party. With Trotsky largely marginalized, Zinoviev and Kamenev had a falling out with Stalin at the 14th Communist Party Conference in April 1925 over Stalin's October 1924 proposal of socialism in one country, which Zinoviev and Kamenev now openly opposed. By this time, the right opposition leader, Bukharin, had elaborated on Stalin's socialism in one country policy, giving it a theoretical justification. This solidified the right opposition as Stalin's main allies, as the triumvirate of Stalin, Zinoviev, Kamenev from recent years broke up. Soon after April 1925, the 1925 conference, Zinoviev and Kamenev formed the new opposition, but they were defeated by Stalin, who was again supported by Bukharin and Rykov at the 14th Party Congress in December 1925. Soon after the defeat at the Congress, Zinoviev and Kamenev joined forces with Trotsky's left opposition in early 1926 in what became known as the United Opposition. From July to October 1926, the United Opposition lost out to Stalin, and its leaders were expelled from the ruling Politburo. In October 1927, soon after the catastrophic events regarding the Chinese Revolution of 1925-27, which confirmed the United Opposition's critical analysis of the Communist Party of China's support for the nationalist Kuomintang, the last United Opposition members were expelled from the Communist Party's Central Committee, and in November 1927, Trotsky and Zinoviev were expelled from the Communist Party itself after holding a street demonstration on the 10th anniversary of the October Revolution. In December 1927, the 15th Party Congress declared left opposition and Trotskyist views to be incompatible with Communist Party membership and expelled all leading left communist supporters from the party. After their expulsion from the 15th Congress, Zinoviev, Kamenev, and their supporters immediately surrendered to Stalin, quote, admitted their mistakes, end quote, and were readmitted to the Communist Party in 1928, although they never regained their former influence and eventually perished in the Great Purge. Trotsky and Trotsky's supporters, on the other hand, refused to capitulate to Stalin and were exiled to remote areas of the Soviet Union in early 1928. Trotsky was eventually expelled from the country in February 1929, sent into exile in Turkey. Trotsky's supporters remained in exile, but their resolve began to waver in 1929 as Stalin turned against Bukharin and Rykov and adopted the policy of collectivization, which appeared to be close to the policy the left opposition advocated earlier. The left opposition attempted to field opposition candidates against the official Communist Party candidates in the 1929 election, but to no avail. Most but not all prominent left opposition members recanted between 1929 and 1934, but they nearly all perished during the Great Purge in the mid-late 1930s, along with the oppositionists who remained unrepentant. Some of its members, while claiming to have given up on their old views, participated in the underground opposition in the USSR. They, like I.N. Smirnov, even maintained contact with Trotsky and his son Sedov. During this period, the Trotskyists formed an opposition bloc with several other groups, for example, the members of the former right opposition. Historian Pierre Bruet stated that the opposition groups were dissolved in early 1933 when many of its members were arrested. However, some documents found in 2018 show that the underground left opposition stayed active even in prison. In fact, the prisons became their centers of activity. In the meantime, Trotsky founded the International Left Opposition in 1930. It was meant to be an opposition group within the Comintern, but members of the Comintern were immediately expelled as soon as they joined or were suspected of joining the International Left Opposition. The International Left Opposition therefore concluded that opposing Stalinism from within the communist organizations controlled by Stalin supporters had become impossible, so new organizations had to be formed. In 1933, the International Left Opposition was renamed the International Communist League, which formed the basis of the Fourth International founded in Paris in 1938. Several members of the left opposition also emerged in literary intellectual activities following their forced exile from Moscow during the interwar period. Radek wrote a biographical account of Lenin. Rakovsky produced a work on the left-wing socialist Saint-Simon. Preobrazhensky completed books on the Soviet economy and the economy of medieval Europe. Smilga chronicled the Bukharin school of thought, and Dingelstedt produced essays on the social structure of India. According to the historian Sheila Fitzpatrick, the scholarly consensus was that Stalin appropriated the position of the left opposition on such matters as industrialization and collectivization. Trotsky maintained that the disproportions and imbalances which became characteristic of Stalinist planning in 1930s, such as the underdeveloped consumer base, along with the priority focus on heavy industry, were due to a number of avoidable problems. Trotsky argued that the industrial drive had been enacted under more severe circumstances several years later and in a less rational manner than originally conceived by the left opposition. American historian Robert Vincent Daniels viewed the left opposition as a critical alternative to the Stalin-Bukharin majority in a number of areas. Daniels stated that the left opposition would have prioritized industrialization but never contemplated the, quote, violent uprooting employed by Stalin. And contrasted most directly with Stalinism on the issue of party democratization and bureaucratization. Concurrently, Daniels believed that the practical differences in their international policy with other factions had been exaggerated, and he contended that Trotsky was no more prepared than other Bolshevik figures to risk war or the loss of trade opportunities despite his support for world revolution. Russian historian Vadim Rogovin argued that the left opposition, led by Trotsky, was a political movement that, quote, offered a real alternative to Stalinism and that to crush this movement was the primary function of the Stalinist terror, end quote. Rogovin also stated that contemporary historians believed that 40,000 to 50,000 people, more than 10% of the party membership, had voted for the platform of the opposition during the 1923 discussion. Rogovin noted that the majority of the party organization, especially in Moscow, had voted for the opposition in 1923. At the same time, Stalin approved the appointment of Amayak Nazaretian, the head of his personal secretariat, who would later falsify voting records of party meetings, which were then reported to Pravda magazine. However, political scientist Susie Weissman criticized the lack of consistency from members of the left opposition over the issue of democratization. If you don't know who Susie Weissman is, she actually has a book in this, an article in this book that I'm reading from, The Ideas of Leon Trotsky, about the relationship between Trotsky and Serge, and wrote one of the big fat biography on Victor Serge. I have it right here on my shelf that I should read soon. However, political scientist Susie Weissman criticized the lack of consistency from members of the left opposition over the issue of democratization. Weissman argues that Trotsky and Preobrazhensky overly focused on intra-party democracy rather than widespread democratization outside of the party during the 1920s. Trotsky would develop his writings of political pluralism in the 1930s. Although Weissman acknowledged the heterogeneous views of the left opposition and described one of their members, Victor Serge, as a consistent defender of a multi-party system and favored a coalition government to bureaucratic rule. Other figures such as Isaac Deutscher and Ernest Mandel maintained that intra-party reforms proposed by the left opposition from 1923 to 1926 would have revitalized the party democratization, mass participation, worker self-management, and eventually a multi-party socialist democracy. Deutscher, if it's of interest. I'm going to assume that Weissman, who's associated with Critique, the journal Critique, I think, would not have held on to the degenerated worker state thesis. I'm not sure exactly where Victor Serge falls on the spectrum, which is kind of like the person that she kind of like, she's a historian of him, but also I think like a supporter of him as well. I think her biography is like pretty hagiographical, perhaps. Not that it's not scholarly or like agreeable, but because I definitely would favor. I have more sympathy with Victor Serge than I have with Leon Trotsky for sure. But what was I going to say? What the hell was I going to say? Oh, but I know at least the journal Critique, they put forward their own kind of conception of, I wouldn't say bureaucratic collectivism, but they would say not call the Soviet Union a worker state, nor would they call it capitalist. But they kind of had their own distinct conception of the USSR. I think it was. I don't know what her agreement or disagreements would be with like Ticktin's conception, but she definitely did a lot of work around the journal Critique as well, just like other people like who don't. What's his name? Donald Filzer. He was like kind of like a critique person. So that's like an important, I don't know if there's like a widespread like literature on it, or like any kind of like secondary literature on it, but like I think the journal Critique around Hillel Ticktin kind of constitutes an important intellectual moment in the history of not just Soviet studies, but in Marxist scholarship in general. But I'm not sure. But anyway, what I'm saying is that Weissman would not accept the degenerated worker state theory. People like Isaac Deutscher and Ernest Mandel did, way past this point of ripeness. The left opposition received active support primarily from intellectuals and the youth section of the Moscow party base. Party histories and documents such as the Great Soviet Encyclopedia recorded varying levels of support for the left opposition across the membership base. At a meeting of workers' cells, 9,843 votes were cast for the Central Committee, which was controlled by Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Stalin at the time, whereas 2,223 voted for the opposition. Conversely, at meetings of student cells, the Central Committee received only 2,790 votes, whereas the opposition received 6,594. Among the military and administrative delegates elected to regional conferences in Moscow, 1,708 voted for the Central Committee, while 878 voted for the opposition. Internationally, Trotsky's opposition and criticism of the ruling Troika received support from several Central Committee members of foreign communist parties. This included Christian Rakovsky, chairman of the Ukrainian Sovnarkom, Boris Souverin of the French Communist Party, and the Central Committee of the Polish Communist Party that was led by prominent theoreticians such as Maximilian Horwitz, Maria Kajutska, and Adolf Varsky. And then there's a list of the leading members of the left opposition. This included Leon Trotsky, People's Commissariat for Foreign Affairs, founder and commander of the Red Army and People's Commissar of War during the Russian Civil War, and de facto leader of the left opposition. Expelled from the USSR in 1929, Trotsky went on to found the Fourth International, assassinated by a Soviet agent in 1940. Alexander Beloborodov, who lived from 1891 to 1938. Mikhail Boguslavsky, who lived from 1886 to 1937. Andrei Bubnov, 1884 to 1938, signed the Declaration of the 46 in December 1923, but defected to Stalin soon thereafter. Later head of the Communist Party organization within the Red Army, and then People's Commissar, Minister of Education, expelled from the party's Central Committee in November 1937, and arrested and perished in the Great Purge. Chen Dushou, who lived from 1879 to 1942, founder of the Chinese Communist Party, from which he was expelled in 1927 and went on to found the Chinese left opposition. Yakov Dobronis, 1890 to 1937, Adolf Joffa, 1883 to 1927, Yosef Kosior, who lived from 1893 to 1937, Nikolai Krestinsky, who lived from 1883 to 1938, Sergei Murachkovsky, who lived from 1883 to 1936, Nikolai Muralov, who lived from 1877 to 1937, and was once Deputy People's Commissar of Agriculture and Moscow District Commander of the Red Army, Valerian Obolensky, also known as N. Osinsky, who lived from 1887 to 1938, one of the leaders of the group of Democratic Centralism. Georgy Apakov, also known as A. Lomov, who lived from 1888 to 1937. Yevgeny Preobrazhensky, who lived from 1886 to 1937, the economic theoretician of the left opposition, the author of the New Economics. Georgy Pyatakov, who lived from 1890 to 1937, Karl Radek, who lived from 1885 to 1939, Christian Rakovsky, who lived from 1873 to 1941, Timofey Sopranov, who lived from 1887 to 1937, one of the leaders of the group of Democratic Centralism, Leonid Serebryakov, who lived from 1890 to 1937, Victor Serge, who lived from 1890 to 1947, went into exile, Ivar Smilga, who lived from 1892 to 1937, chairman of the Regional Committee of the Soviets in Finland in 1917, chairman of the Centro-Balt Central Committee of the Baltic Fleet 1917 to 1918, Ivan Nikitich Smirnov, who lived from 1881 to 1936, Vladimir Smirnov, 1887 to 1937, one of the leaders of the group of democratic centralism, Lev Sosnovsky, who lived from 1886 to 1937, former head of Agitprop and journalist. Okay, thank you so much for listening. I know that was a lot, but I think it was a worthwhile endeavor to try to just like get a general feel for the left opposition in this period.